Welcome back to day 2 of our SRAP Live 2024 Summit. Yesterday we heard important discussions on factory farm gas or biogas, in which we have seen explosive growth and investment these past few years. We also focused on state level legislation and the importance of working with and building trusted relationships with state decision makers to support regenerative, sustainable, and just food and agriculture systems. If you missed these conversations, we're going to be posting those recordings of them online at our website at sraproject.org, and we'll have those recordings also in Spanish as well, thanks to our interpreters. Please visit the website to sign up also for our newsletter and stay up to date on the latest news and posts. We should be able to put out, I believe, a notice whenever we get these recordings posted for you all. Whether you're brand new to these conversations or if you've been engaged in food system work for decades, I hope yesterday's discussions left you inspired to either join or continue the fight to effect positive and lasting change and to pave the way for a better, more socially responsible food future. Today, we're going to continue the summit with 2 additional panels, as well as an exciting keynote address by author and SRAP board member, Austin Frerich. Our first panel discussion covers the topic of utilizing data for food system advocacy. Our second panel is going to explore opportunities for working together and amplifying voices to achieve large-scale food systems change. I hope you'll be able to join us for all of today's events. And again, if you can't, we'll get everything up online so you can catch up later. With that, I'm happy to introduce our first panel's moderator. It is SRAP's own Cole Dickerson. He serves as the manager of SRAP's Water Rangers program. His passion for environmentally and socially responsible food systems grew out of his love for carrots and snack peppers, he says. While studying environmental sciences at the University of Virginia, he started working for a student-run organization that offered CSA shares for students. He recently graduated from the University of Colorado Boulder with a master's degree in sustainable food systems. Cole is driven by the understanding that we all benefit from a healthy environment and systems that are socially just. And with that, Cole, I will let you take over.
Thanks, Sherry. I really appreciate it. That was an awesome introduction, and welcome everyone to day 2 of SRAP Live. Yesterday was full of some really great conversations and discussions and information, and I know today will be the same. I'm really excited to be leading this panel, utilizing data for food systems advocacy. So data may seem like a complex topic. It could seem big and scary. We're here today to tell you it's not. At the most basic level, data are facts and statistics. They're collected together to tell a story. In this case, the story of our industrial agriculture system. And with that understanding, we can use it to make decisions on how we eventually will get to a socially responsible food future. So to give you a little bit of an idea of how SRAP uses data in our work, as Sherry mentioned, I am the Water Rangers program manager. I work with Lynn Henning to teach communities how to monitor water quality in their area and what to do with the data that they collect. Understanding where water pollution occurs is really important for getting effective action taken to hold industrial livestock operations accountable and build movements to eventually achieve what we want to achieve in this work. Another really, really great thing that we do, we have our own GIS specialist, Donald, in-house. He's created the GIS portal that I'll put a link in the chat here shortly. And if you go and look at this portal, it's the first of its kind GIS mapping database to combine all of this different data and information in one place. You can see where CAFOs are, see where these facilities are in the United States. You can see where impaired waterways are. You can look at demographic information. You can really put all the pieces together to understand how this system is impacting humans, impacting the environment, impacting our communities. And it's a really great tool. So with that in mind, I do note that there's just so much really great work outside of our organization, and that's what we're here to talk about today. We have a really great group of panelists that will be discussing some of their work with data in food systems advocacy. So, a quick run through of our panelists.
Passo aqui dos jornalistas, temos Ethan Duke.
Ethan Duke is the co-founder and director of Missouri River Bird Observatory. Deja Wall is the community science manager at Clean Air, North Carolina. Yenshi Shu is the investigative reporter at Flatwater Free Press in Nebraska. And Casey Neese is director of research and data activism at
The
Frontline
activism of the
Farming
dentals
in
and frontline
Colorado.
farming.
So I want to pause here and note what some of you may be asking, what can I take away from this conversation? So I asked each of our panelists to go through some of their work and identify some best practices that the audience can take away to use in their data work, whether it's collecting data or sharing data. We see it in so many different ways. So that's something to note here. And I encourage everyone who is involved in data projects, whether it's collecting water quality data or sifting through CAFO violations at the regulatory databases online, write in the chat what you're doing. We'd love questions. So add any questions to our Q&A. We'll hopefully get to them at the end of the panel. And another reminder for all panelists to speak slowly for Spanish interpretation.
Stop that.
So without further ado, I would love to introduce our first panelist, Ethan Duke. He grew up in rural northern Appalachia in western New York State and near the headwaters of the Genesee River, which was once home to the native tribes of the Iroquois Federation. After serving in the U.S. Air Force for 4 years, Ethan discovered his passion for bird watching while stationed in the UK. And upon returning to the US, he earned his bachelor's degree in wildlife management in 2006 and eventually founded the Missouri River Bird Observatory. Ethan's passion for technology and GIS systems has led to MRBO compiling the most comprehensive bird data set of spatially explicit locations of birds using Missouri's most imperiled habitats. And as a testament to the diversity of experiences in our work on this event today, he has recently brought this expertise to food systems work. He helped to collect and analyze data to understand the amount of animal waste from animal feeding operations in Missouri watersheds and how that animal waste is impacting those watersheds in Missouri. So to start us off at the ground level, Ethan's going to share about this project, how it was developed to creatively and compellingly show the impact of animal feeding operations on watersheds in Missouri. So I'll pass it over to you, Ethan.
Thank you, Cole, and thank you, SRAP, for having me here. I'm really excited today to be able to contribute in some small way, to helping find solutions to these challenges that, if you've been listening to the panels from yesterday and through, are like some of the most challenging aspects of our disastrous food system. And I believe every single one of us here, every single one of you participating has some ability, some skill set, some unique talent that you can help harness for this team, and we can do the work that it takes to make for effective and efficient advocacy. So, as Cole mentioned, my expertise is in that niche of data collection and analysis and geographic information systems. I just cannot overstate how rapidly technology is changing right now, largely due to AI. And this can have a profound impact on our efficiency and our efficacy in our advocacy work. So from an example to my work that Cole kind of hinted at, my organization, which I co-founded with my partner, Dana Ripper, we began working with ranchers through the National Audubon Society's program that is now known as the Audubon Conservation Ranching Program. Basically, it provides a market-based incentives for good stewardship. So we at MRBO, the Missouri River Bird Observatory, developed this metric now known as the bird friendliness indices. And that is used to communicate a lot of complex and robust data and analysis into like a user-friendly way that basically express an aspect of a conservation value. If you can imagine that, how do you put a value to your quality of water? How do you put a value to conservation? But this is important that we are able to do that because we need to start moving towards a way to some people that only understand things that can be quantified in a way that may be interpreted in some way that's monetary as well. But we're providing that robust data and finding ways to communicate it to not only advocates but all sorts of other grassland stewards. So, anyways, in the process of doing that, we needed to be super efficient in collecting and analyzing data. And just to give an example, what we do in our grassland bird work, last year we covered 84 sites in Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska. Uh, Complete coverage of these sites documenting birds, doing what's called a line transect distance sampling. So we covered transects, marking where the birds were. And that covered about 140 miles of transects. We did it within a 2-month window. We did analysis on last year's data plus all data going back every year back to 2012 to provide density estimates for individual bird species that are grassland obligates and roll that into the scoring thing that I was talking about. The day surveyors finished surveys, we had that analysis done and pushed out in operation dashboards by high noon. So that's how quickly data and workflow and processes are happening and how exciting it can be for us to harness some of that data to communicate about CAFOs and what's going on out there. So I just want to give a big shout out because I just started getting into this type of advocacy and this end of the food system with CAFOs and watersheds a couple years ago. And it's a big thanks to SRAP, especially Ashlyn from SRAP, who's been an absolute rock, knitting together friends from the Missouri Coalition for the Environment, I heard from yesterday, as a variety of other folks that are on the ground, county alliances, neighbors, people that have been fighting this fight for far longer than I have and have far more knowledge than I. And I just use my little skill sets to help do that. And I'll just walk you through how I kind of aggregate the data here, do a little screen sharing, and let's just see kind of the magic of how some of this happens. So some of you may be familiar with GIS systems. Basically, don't pay attention to too much noise if you don't know it. I want to draw your attention to, of course, that's a map of Missouri, but down below into the workflow here. These things are just like little steps and processes that are now automated, where I can import data from anything from like house districts or center districts, HUC units of watersheds, any sort of geographic boundary. I can pull that data in and start beginning to measure the area within it, those sorts of things. Then at the same time, import our NPDES data, which is our DNR data on permitted CAFOs. And within those permitted CAFOs, for instance, you'll often see that there's different animal unit metrics. And so we'll say, this is how many animal units we may have of chickens, how many laying hens, how many broilers, how many swine under this weight over that weight. Well, once you know those numbers, this is free public available data. Once we pull those in, and then as I mentioned earlier, I could use a little bit of AI, and I coded out a calculator that will calculate the amount of waste per animal unit if given the animal unit types, and we can calculate the amount of waste per facility. And then we can begin to quantify that number within districts, within watersheds, however you do that. And then later in the process, I pull in the US Census data and then compute the amount of human waste, because oftentimes there's, well, how about this human waste? Well, first of all, we know human waste is treated, but also people aren't aware of the scale of animal waste compared to human waste. So we can pull in census data, aggregate that, estimate the amount of waste there, and then calculate that out and push that to any sort of geography, like I said. So I've done it in a few different ones. And what that, I don't know if Cole will put the links in the chat, but I have them handy too. I can copy and paste them right in the chat, but I'll show you kind of what the end result looks like when we end up doing that. So here is an exploration of our Huck 8 level watersheds in Missouri, which is known as the subbasin watershed scale size. And within that, I've aggregated and counted out and then pushed into this operation dashboard so that you can interact with the data. So let's go in and say Northern Missouri here, select this whole watershed, and then the data will populate for the amount of waste within that watershed from CAFOs versus human waste. And I also just threw in modern age, you can just grab data from anywhere. I pulled in the EPA attains database to show impaired stream segments. So when I select that watershed, you can look at what stream segments are also impaired and what they may be impaired with, which is a variety of different things ranging from E. coli to chlorine to all sorts of things here. But you can imagine as you're trying to communicate to somebody about what's going on in a watershed, these are easy to do tools for somebody in the GIS field and good data as long as you have the right people telling them what data you want to display. And here you can see what's going on with this watershed. All these yellow dots are CAFOs. So you may have some indicator that those two things may be connected, right? So there's that. And then also, if you want to just communicate beyond just your regular citizenry, you can also create these, what I did here with districts, whether it's a soil district or a House district or a Senate district. Here we can see which Senate districts may be full of more waste than others. And so here we have amount of the same sort of statistics plus a comparative chart to see what's going on. And this can be quite compelling when you have a legislator that doesn't really know what an aquifer is, let alone what may be happening with the extent of waste within their district. So with that, I will just kind of wrap it up here and just say that my hope is that someone might be able to dedicate a little bit more time than me and work like this at multiple scales so that advocates in any geography can have access to data like this, along with toolkits that are like some of those that were addressed yesterday with biogas. If you have a CAFO coming in, here's a list of questions you have. Here's also a list of data that you might be able to access. And so they can look at that data will pop up locally. They can bring it to local municipalities, the state legislators, or even advocate at the national scale. So hopefully that inspires some of you to think about ways that you can also help with your own unique skill sets.
That was awesome, Ethan. It was really cool to see that back end. I shout out Donald in the chat. I think that's a great thing for people who may be unfamiliar to sort of see how that works. I'm wondering if, in brief, you can just mention, what makes the concept of a waste shed compelling, animal manure and manure in a watershed. Why was that sort of what you wanted to go in and show?
Well, it was a kind of an amalgamation of things, and this was like the brainchild kind of a bunch of partners that we work with. But one of the things was back in the day in Missouri, which has a very strong conservation department, which is separate from its DNR. It's really interesting. But at one point in time, they had developed the concept of our watershed, sort of like the EPA says, "How's your water?" But it's the idea of the community having ownership of that and ownership of the stewardship of that. And that was kind of the first thought. And then we started thinking about, behind the scenes, everybody loves tactics when you're dealing with strategy with politics. And we thought, well, who knows these neighbors of these legislators or what's going on in these districts? Then the two ideas came together and said, what if we take stewardship and hoist that responsibility also on legislators as well? And say, these are your waste sheds and these are what we're dealing with. So it's something that can be used across anybody's perspective, whether they're a legislator or a citizen, and take the ownership and stewardship of that watershed.
That's awesome. That makes total sense. I think that's a really, really compelling thing to be developing and to be showing people where all this waste is going. Thanks, Ethan. All right. And Ethan, I think there's a question for you in the Q&A if you're able to write that out. I'll move the panel along. We can maybe get to that at the end during the Q&A if you'd rather answer that verbally. But let's move on to Deja Wall. Deja is an environmental advocate with a long-established interest in environmental equity, community involvement, and educating those around her about many environmental topics. She currently serves as the Community Science Manager for Clean Air North Carolina. Deja has worked as a stormwater specialist and educator for a municipal stormwater partnership, a legislative assistant for an environmental council in Seattle, as well as a donor communications assistant for a nonprofit with a focus on providing clean water to those in need. She holds a Master of Science in Environmental Policy from Johns Hopkins University, as well as a Bachelor of Science in Sustainable Development from Appalachian State. Deja has also obtained a graduate certificate in Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, and she uses the skills learned to further reach communities and identify patterns of inequity. So we started sort of at the ground level, and I think it's appropriate to move here from ground to atmosphere. Deja works with underrepresented communities across North Carolina to monitor air pollution using the Purple Air Monitoring Network. So Deja, I'll pass it off to you to share more about this work and the importance of working with communities on data projects.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cole, and thank you to SRAP for having me today. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about our work in Eastern North Carolina. But first, I'll just give a little brief overview of the community science program. So our program started in 2016, and we partner with individuals and organizations across the state of North Carolina to increase the amount of scientific data on levels of air pollution and make it available to researchers and state officials, but most importantly, residents, to advance policy goals with the main goal of improving air quality and public health. So collectively, we actually utilize 4 sensor types, but our bread and butter is Purple Air. That's the sensor type that we started with, and Purple Air actually built their first sensor for clean air. The CEO built it for us on his kitchen table, so they're a longstanding partner. But we do use 4 sensor types, both indoor and outdoor, and we measure particulate matter, VOCs, carbon monoxide, nitric oxide, nitrogen dioxide, and ozone. And we've deployed over 280 sensors across the state and have various different approaches and programs for residents that participate based on, their needs and their interests. However, as building a socially responsible future goes, we are working on a 3-year research grant in Eastern North Carolina, specifically Sampson County, where unfortunately hogs outnumber people. So just to give a little bit of background on Sampson County, over the past many decades, like other CAFO communities, the county has found itself home to many major polluting entities, such as the Sampson County landfill, the Enviva Sampson wood pellet facility, and many CAFOs of both swine and poultry that's scattered throughout the county. This has caused, an array of health effects coupled with the reduction in quality of life for many residents. Several folks have complained about not even wanting to be outside because of the smell or because of hog feces literally being sprayed on or near their properties. And then, all of this coupled with North Carolina's failure to regulate poultry farms properly has just caused an exacerbation of this harm. So this, of many reasons, is why we are partnering with Sampson County residents, in particular, the Environmental Justice Community Action Network, which is a local organization in Sampson County. They're our main partners, and the main project objectives are to establish an air monitoring network to address all of these environmental justice implications caused by the cumulative impact of air pollution. So residents will host Purple Air sensors and engage in data collection through, they'll help us inform the study design and the implementation, which we have already begun. So we've deployed 29 sensors thus far in Sampson County. And then further down in the project, we will work with the Research Triangle Institute and another contracted entity, which the RFP is out for right now, to conduct hydrogen sulfide and VOC monitoring, which community members will help to influence and guide where we can direct that hotspot monitoring through their lived experiences, through where they may have, seen something or smelled something. And then amongst all of this, we will also be doing clean air education, as well as technology and advocacy training to facilitate understanding of the data that we're collecting and to consistently keep folks involved, and just to, generally increase agency and general understanding. But yeah, our ultimate goal is to, with all of these efforts, we will motivate changes to the local and state policies related to major sources of air pollution and just CAFOs in general in the county. We're really excited about this project. This has been a long process of building up community trust, building up community contacts. And yeah, we finally have the capacity and the resources and the funding to work hand in hand with community members. And we've really hit the ground running. So just to be mindful of time, I'll stop there because I could go on and on.
Awesome. Thanks, Daisha. I want to dig in a little bit to sort of that last thing you said. You talked about, the intentionality of building trust with communities and working with communities on these projects. So can you dive in a little deeper into how clean air works to contribute to data justice through these initiatives, and maybe like what data justice is?
Absolutely. So yeah, oftentimes, community members or environmentally impacted residents, they find themselves subjects and not the beneficiaries of data that's taken in their very own communities, let alone really experience or are part of the processes in which bring about political or social change from the data that's being, collected around their lived experience. So this is what data justice really tries to get to and to solve. And that's a major reason why data justice is a framework that we use to ensure that information and knowledge is available to everyone, so that we can continue to follow up and provide education, access to resources, but also learn from community members themselves, because they are the experts of their lived experience. They are often the experts. They know much more than we do in terms of what's actually happening in their communities. I have a GIS background. I think mapping is so important. But sometimes, breaking down community experience to like the tract level or the block level is not really going to give you the full picture. So community input is very, very important. So yeah, it's a framework that we use. And it just ensures that we can continue to follow up and provide those access. And it allows us to look at data very differently, including the power, the politics, the accountability, and most importantly, how we build and maintain trust with our most impacted communities. So we do this through several ways, and I'll try to keep it brief, but the most obvious being, the sensors that we provide, all of the sensor types that we use. The data is available on a public platform where folks can go to the maps themselves, see their data whenever they want. But if, recognizing that some people don't have time for that, I also provide monthly reports to environmentally impacted communities that host our sensors. And we use that through our programming. So there's a code that we created. You put in the sensor index and it spits out this report that gives out daily averages for the month. We also have an emissions reporting form where folks can, just report on the ground experiences, whether that's through smelling something, seeing something, experiencing an adverse health impact. And that allows us to connect, both the qualitative and the quantitative piece of what people are experiencing on the ground, especially when it comes to particulate matter, because it's so variable. And so it's hard to understand where these sources might actually be coming from. So having that community experience and that data and them reporting really helps to connect those pieces. And then lastly, I'll briefly mention a project we're working on, which we're really excited about, but we're building a data dashboard. It's a 2-year project. We're like a year and a half in. And our stakeholder groups, we have 10 stakeholders, and they are all from environmentally impacted communities, and they're helping to build this tool, because we recognize that there are a lot of GIS mapping tools. Again, they are really great, but sometimes the basic user doesn't even, they don't know how to navigate through some of these tools. And the tools are intended for, these communities half the time, but some folks just don't, it doesn't come as naturally if you don't maybe have experience in operating maps, creating maps, things like that. So we are creating a dashboard for and by communities. They're informing the usability of it. They're informing the type of data that we're putting in there, all sorts of things. So yeah, those are just some examples.
Awesome. That's very helpful, and I think such an important part of the data conversation that historically has been overlooked is how this work impacts the communities that we're actually working within. So I appreciate you expanding on that. Great. So let's move on to Yenshi Xu. I'm really excited that you're here, Yenshi. So Yenshi is an investigative reporter at the Flatwater Free Press, Nebraska's first statewide nonprofit newsroom. She's written extensively about nitrate contamination in Nebraska's groundwater, which earned 2 national journalism awards. Yenshi is a graduate of the University of Missouri-Columbia. She has previously reported in North Carolina, Missouri, and the District of Columbia. So the media is such an important piece of all this. It's an important tool for advocacy and data sharing through storytelling. So Yenshi's going to share about the process of using water quality and CAFO data in Nebraska in her investigations and what attendees can learn from that work. So I'll pass it off to you, Yenshi.
Thank you for the introduction, Cole, and thank you, Ethan and Deja, for sharing the insights from the projects you've worked on. I found it really, really informative. So I'm really excited today to share what I've learned, from reporting on Nebraska's nitrate issue and sort of the data I was able to use and present to the readers, which I thought was really important because I think that the nitrate problem was covered, pretty widely, but I just saw our project as an opportunity to kind of pull together all the relevant info and all the data sets in one place to show people how bad it has gotten and sort of the gaps in our regulatory system that contributed to the nitrate issue we're facing today. So just to give you a little bit of background, Nebraska, like 85% of Nebraskans actually rely on groundwater as their drinking water source. And then contamination from excessive use of fertilizers, mostly commercial fertilizers for corn, and animal waste that leach into groundwater have contributed to the basically the high levels of nitrate we've seen in public water systems and domestic wells. And of course, people don't always know about the nitrate issue. And when I came here, I was like, well, what is nitrate? So it's extremely important to kind of see we as an ag state and how ag has played a role in water quality for sure, and how we could help connect the dots for regular Nebraskans. And so I want to share my screen a little bit. Let's see. Okay, I'll just do this. Okay, so like I mentioned, I really wanted to show the different aspects of the nitrate contamination. So from source to kind of the end products, the water that we're drinking. So my first thought was, okay, we could probably show drinking water contamination, because I was aware that several villages in Nebraska have had nitrate contamination issues. And so how I go about this is that when I have some contaminant I want to look into, I always see what are the data sources, and I always go back to the regulatory agencies. And so, for example, there's 3 big data sources. One is for drinking water, public water systems, municipal water systems, for example. And then we have domestic wells and monitoring wells, that are normally not part of the, regular drinking water, public water systems. And then we also have CAFO's monitoring wells, which I'll talk about later. So in terms of drinking water and public water systems, I think that those wells are normally regulated by either the Department of Environment, equivalents in your community, and also or the DHHS. And so in Nebraska, we have this tool called the Drinking Water Watch, which I think a lot of states have. And so as you can see, you can just go to their website and look at the violations and enforcement actions that have occurred, and look at sample results by analyte. And so in this case, I looked at the nitrate violations in the past, and I was able to make a request to the our state's Department of Environment and Energy, and I asked for all the test results of public water systems and the violations since 2010 by contaminant. And so this was the data set I was able to get. And so I was able to figure out how many public water systems have had nitrate contamination at least once, above the EPA drinking water standard. And then I was able to see if there were municipalities that had multiple nitrate contamination, in the past, and what that could mean for the communities. And so this was the drinking water site for public water systems. And then in our state, we also have a groundwater quality clearinghouse, which contains test results of both monitoring wells and domestic wells for the most part. And then there's some other livestock wells as well, and irrigation wells. Those are monitored for mostly just for monitoring water quality purposes. And so using this, I was able to actually match this with our state's private well registry, and I was able to identify this family whose water tested above the EPA limit, and the kid had cancer. And so because a big part of the story is we care about nitrate because it's not only related to blue baby syndrome, but scientists are increasingly finding evidence that it could be related to pediatric cancers and other health problems as well. So, and then Nebraska has the 7th highest pediatric cancer rate nationwide. And so we wanted to just show what that could mean for families. And so using this tool, we're able to see, which wells have had high nitrate levels, and, and also we're able to see trend lines. And then this is the last part, of the, major, three of the major data sources we relied on is for CAFOs. And this is actually a report submitted by the CAFO showing different kinds of, chemicals that they tested in their monitoring wells. And of course, they were required to install those monitoring wells because the state's environmental agency deemed it necessary to monitor water quality in those wells to see if any contaminants has entered the water table. And so in this case, nobody's really drinking from these wells, but if you see a really high level, it could mean something, especially, when you see a high ammonia and high nitrate, it tends to be some sort of leaks, according to experts. And so we were able to see the history of, nitrate levels and at that feedlot, I believe. And so this was pretty helpful for us to ask questions about, okay, so what does this mean and what has the state done? And in most cases, our state has mostly just asked CAFO owners to keep monitoring. In certain cases, they've asked them to plant trees or, sub barriers, and trying to make sure that these animal feeding operations are spreading their manure properly. But these are important questions to ask, and we can at least see that in this case, it seemed that there's some sort of contaminant discovered on that CAFO. And so, and then what's also really important is to kind of see the statewide trend of nitrate levels. And then this was a screen grab from our state's groundwater monitoring report. And so as you can see, this trend line, the median nitrate level in all the samples from 2001 to 2020, it was slowly going up. And so we also use that in the story to tell people that, hey, maybe this is a problem, that we have seen this upward trend. And then that kind of prompted a lot of our readers to ask the question of what we could do. Let's test our water. And then our state legislators have also, adopted or proposed rules to basically help prevent, nitrate contamination, and give people some sort of rebate or like a program to help cost share their water treatment systems. So yeah, with that, I'll just stop sharing right here. Thank you.
This is so cool to see how y'all are going through your process. It's really awesome. So thanks for sharing that, Yenshi. I'm curious what the process was like for requesting the data set about water contaminants in public water systems. Was it easy to get that? Was it hard?
Right. Yeah, it's actually really interesting. I think that for me as a journalist, and this was the first environmental story that I actually reported on, so I didn't really have the language, to basically request that data set. And then so it was interesting because I actually requested other emails and a local authority agency's emails, and I was able to see that he had requested similar data to the NDE, and then our state environmental agency. And that's how I was able to reproduce that, and I said, okay, he requested data from his district, and I want it for the whole state. So I actually had to go through a couple of tries just to see, how I could get it. But I think that the most important thing is that you always try to go to the regulatory agency for that, who collects that data to ask for it. And then with, individual, from the Drinking Water Watch website, you were able to see individual test results. So I know that data existed. So that's why I was able to say, okay, I know that you have this, help me make this request. I asked the, state environmental agency, and I was like, okay, just help me make this request. And I want, the same thing for the whole state, of a list of all the, agents or public water systems that have violated, the EPA standards. And of course they track that. So that's how I was able to get my hands on that.
Awesome. I know how important that process is to either just ask a regulatory agency or submit a Freedom of Information Act request more officially. And if anyone's curious about learning more about that, SRAP provides support in helping communities to get that information. So reach out to us if you're interested in learning more about that. I'm glad that you brought that up, Yenshi.
Thanks.
So let's move on to Casey Neese. Casey is the Director of Research and Data Activism at Frontline Farming, holds a master's in cultural anthropology from the University of Denver, and a bachelor's degree from Hampshire College in U.S. Ethnic Studies and Oral History. In 16 years of collaborative organizing and fundraising, and 9 years in research and data, she has developed strong systems design skills, employed a range of mixed method research methodologies, and worked with diverse stakeholders on social impact, policy, and educational projects. Her expertise extends from large data sets to ethnographic storytelling. Casey's work is a North Star of data equity and sovereignty. She sits on various data teams in the farm, food, and hunger movements in Colorado. So I'm really excited that Casey's joining us. We've talked a lot about data projects that measure environmental conditions. When we think about a socially responsible or sustainable food system, it's important that we're looking beyond environmental conditions and are also considering social conditions. Deja introduced us to this in the panel, and a socially responsible food system is built on principles of equity and justice for the people in that system, as well as the environment. And Casey does so much awesome work to collect data with underrepresented communities in our food system to advocate for food systems change, policy change, all of the above. So Casey, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Cole. I kind of deviate a little bit from the rest of the folks on the panel, being coming from an anthropology and like oral historian kind of background, and so my heart lies in the qualitative data side of things. But we all recognize the importance of quant data and incorporating both numbers and story into our work. So when we're disseminating information, there's these kind of heartstrings you can pull, and it's not just numbers, but there's narratives behind it as well. So I'll talk a little bit about Frontline, but most of what I'll be talking about today is our sister organization, Project Protect Food System Workers. So basically, Frontline is a Black and women-led nonprofit farm and farmer advocacy organization in the Denver metro area. And our work focuses on enhancing equity and resilience in Colorado's urban Front Range by elevating the leadership of women and people of color in our food system. So farm is our core, actually. All of our staff are on the farm at least one day a week, and farming is central to our operations, but our work does span across food security, food justice, and food sovereignty. And that piece is how we got involved with Project Protect Food Systems. So in 2020, during the start of that pandemic, we were seeing that a lot of ag workers were being left behind and not included in a lot of the conversations around frontline workers. And so in Colorado, we started a collective movement that has since kind of grown into its own entity called Project Protect Food System Workers. And it basically is an entity that exists to elevate the voices of those who are invisible in the food system. And specifically, our work does center on farm workers and agricultural workers, less so on like meat packing workers, although they are part of our community and we do reach out to them as well. So Project Protect Food System Workers has this program called the Promotora Network, which is essentially promoter network. They're outreach workers that go to agricultural communities and do work directly providing resources and navigational support to agricultural workers across rural Colorado. And these promotoras are themselves from these communities. So their neighbors, their husbands, their wives work in ag, or they themselves have worked in agriculture. We have someone who grew up doing strawberry picking as a migrant farm worker out in California, and now she feels blessed enough to be able to serve ag workers here in Colorado. So I'm unsure how many of you are aware, but agricultural workers are a large gap in data. And so when we set out to start doing this work, a lot of people turned to us and said, well, we don't know how many agricultural workers are in Colorado. We don't have that data. And I started digging in, and the USDA counts through employers counts hired labor, but not contract labor. You know, the immigration will count the visa labor that comes in, but that's the only thing they count. The Department of Labor's census, a lot of farms are actually exempt from reporting in the census and in unemployment reporting. So ag workers aren't well counted there. Same with the Census Bureau and Demographer's Office and National Agricultural Workers Survey, you know, the list goes on. And so there's this gap in government data about how many ag workers are out there in Colorado and nationally and what they're experiencing. So we knew from the get-go that that was a big gap in the data. And so not only were these promotoras out there talking to workers, we did a lot of intensive training around how to collect data, how to do reporting ethically and rigorously with our promotoras. in addition to training them on data collection, we also, we would look at, every month we'd have a monthly meeting, we'd look at COVID data, or later on we'd look at wastewater data, outbreak data from our public health department at Colorado, to talk with our promotores about like, hey, this is what's happening across the state. If you know of folks in this area, there's a really high COVID count in your wastewater. And so like you should be really focused on distributing COVID tests to the workers in that specific neighborhood. And so we were able to kind of use data to help inform their outreach, but then they also became frontline data collectors themselves. And so we have a lot of kind of field programmatic data. We have some independent survey data that we've done as well. We've worked with the National Center of Farm Worker Health in Weld County, Colorado, to do a COVID community assessment where our promotores were the enumerators for that survey. And throughout this work, we really gathered a lot of information that that helped us move towards policy change. And so on top of agricultural workers being omitted from a lot of statistical data sets by the government, they also were omitted from the Fair Labor and Wage Standards Act, which I might be getting the name of that act wrong, but basically that act that gave us 40-hour work weeks and overtime pay and minimum wage. Agricultural workers as well as domestic workers were exempt from those labor rights. And so we started moving towards implementing a Bill of Rights for agricultural workers in Colorado. And we were getting pushback, right? We were getting pushback about a lot of different things, but one of which was we don't actually know how many workers are in the state. There's a gap in the data. If you don't know how many workers, we don't know how many people this is going to affect. And so we can't like have this conversation around the bill because we don't know how many people it's affecting. And so two things happened, right? One, I kind of dove into USDA data as well as our H-2A visa data and a bunch of other data sets to pull, to create a methodology to estimate the amount of workers in the state. Simultaneously, our promotores were out there collecting narratives and testimony from workers about what they were experiencing. And these workers were experiencing some really devastating wage theft and harm on the job and frontline climate chaos of not having cold water when it's 100 degrees outside in an arid desert climate. And they didn't want to show up to a public hearing and out themselves. They didn't want to put themselves in that dangerous situation that might put their income in jeopardy, put their immigration status in jeopardy, put their family in jeopardy. And so we simultaneously worked with the quantitative data sets that were available to us to gather information of what we knew was the reality of agricultural workers in Colorado. And we worked with our promotores who were able to collect the narrative that backs up not only these are the people, but here's what they're experiencing. And so through that work of kind of mixed method, using public data sets, gathering data with community, allowing community a platform to share their data and their story, we were able to pass a really historic bill in Colorado that not only gave agricultural workers a lot of labor rights that they were previously missing, but writes into law that the exemption of agricultural workers from labor rights is a racist underpinning of agriculture. Because in Colorado, as well as nationally, it's 70 to 90% of our communities who labor in agriculture are people of color. And so continuing to exempt those communities from labor rights is systemic racism. And so this whole process, abbreviated for the time that we have available here, really exemplifies for me why it's important to pull in both narrative and quantitative data when you're presenting to towards public change, towards policy change, to kind of pull at those heartstrings, talk about why it's important. And the one thing I'll share my screen for, just so that we have some visuals for this little bit of the talk, is a community archive we developed. So after we collected all this testimony and information for the bill, I was left with like audio recordings and handwritten transcripts and um, photos of what people were experiencing out in the field, and it was all stored on my Google Drive. And I felt how unethical it was to be keeping that narrative private and not sharing it back out to the community because these agricultural workers took the time to share it with us. And so this archive came about as a way to reshare the narratives and the qualitative data that we've collected about agricultural workers and the reason why the bill was needed in the first place. And so this has, you can browse stories by medium and look at their photo stories or audio stories. And we have a lot of recordings from both the testimony from the bill hearing as well as interviews and audio stories from the workers. This platform also allows us to anonymize appropriately so that workers aren't being put in any danger when they're telling sensitive information. I'm going to end on one of my favorite little portions of the archive is actually just the fact that workers have a lot of skill and knowledge already embedded in it, a lot of like just personal realities. And so not only does this archive contain difficulties that people face, it contains some beautiful stories as well. There is this kitten that was rescued out of a calf pen, and the worker took the kitten home, even paid a $200 pet fee for having the kitten in the home in order to rescue it and make sure it wasn't just stuck in this calf pen getting trampled by baby cows. So it's not just a story about negativity. There are these like beautiful realities that workers face and live up to every day. And so there's some this archive allows the ability to tell a full story, and we can drop in links for the website and other data work as needed.
I feel like I'm crying over here, tearing up a little bit. It's awesome to bring in the qualitative, the narrative, the story to this conversation, because I think it is really important considering I mean, seeing that picture and hearing that story pulls on the heartstrings, like you said, and that can be really important. Do you want to share any more about, important considerations to effectively and respectively collect this storytelling, this narrative with underrepresented communities?
Yeah, I think I attribute all of our success just to the promotores themselves. They are my storytellers, they are my data collectors. Like, I'm not the one out there doing the data collection. I don't think I'd even be the right person to do so. Our promotores have such deep roots in the communities they work in. They've built trust, they've built like international connections. Workers who are coming from Mexico every year text our promotores before arriving, being like, hey, I'm gonna come here. Like, is there any way you can bring me an extra pillow when I arrive? Or we'll probably need some blankets. So like the promotores have such like robust and deep relations and community. That's why they're so good at what they do with data collection. And so I always chalk up our success to them, because without folks like that, I wouldn't be able to write the reports that have like the correct context in them. Uh, and so that if ever you're looking to do some sort of community collection data, I always encourage you to find those community members who want to be doing that work as well, because they're going to be even better at it than you are.
Great. Thank you for that. And thanks for bringing in the perspective of the people that work in these systems. That's a really, really important integral piece of all this. And I realized as we were going through, I was posting links in just the host chat. So recently I posted all the links to everyone's work in the full chat. If I missed anything, panelists, feel free to let me know. I can include that, or feel free to include that yourself. I want to take a little bit of time to have a brief discussion. And if anyone from the audience has any questions, please put them in the Q&A. We can get to those in about 10 minutes, hoping to stay on track here. So with our audience at this panel in mind, I'd like to think about data collection and data sharing. So maybe we split those up. What is one of the most important considerations for communities regarding data collection to have the biggest impact in promoting a better food future? And I'll leave it up in the air if anyone would like to jump in and answer that.
I can try. So I just think that it's really important. We have like a full data set of, like a lot of different test results and wells in our case. And then, but it was also super, super important for community members and to share what they have seen, because I just think that that's just not part of the official data set. And then we were actually able to like learn a lot from it. And then that could also raise awareness for other residents to learn about their own wells and to get their own water tested. So I think that individual stories are really, really important in that way. And, and I really hope that we could have some sort of mechanism to basically let them submit their results or communicate that with the media or or have a way for them to present their findings to policy groups or the legislature, for example, in that matter.
Awesome. Other important considerations that people on the call, for people on the call considering data collection?
I would say I agree that the way it gets collected, the way like making it as easy as possible to receive the data is really important. I think the other big takeaway from my learnings is that I follow a lean research method, which means make it right sized, make it what you need to be collecting at that specific stage of your research, and don't try to cast the widest net possible. Know that you'll do the work again and you can expand the research or go back and collect new data that comes up because you didn't know it was important the first time. And that allows space and breadth to really work with the data that means the most to you in that moment. So that would be my big takeaway.
I'll just add that I think it's really important that communities are left with a pathway for action. Just as I, was mentioning when I was speaking, oftentimes community members feel like information is extracted from them and they're kind of left no better off than before or with no significant changes. And so continuing to follow up, continuing to work in partnership with communities for a sustainable pathway to that action is pretty critical to actually bring about, these changes that communities are seeking.
How do you all at Clean Air follow up? So if you collect your data, how are you continuing to engage with them?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, the monthly report outs, but we also offer a wide array of advocacy and educational trainings. So we do have an advocacy program and we have an education program, and there's many different programs within each of those programs, but community members oftentimes they give us topics that they want to learn about. And then we in turn bring in, the proper resources or the proper entities to speak on that. So just as an example, we're working with a local community here in Charlotte where I live. We've been working with this community. It's a formerly redline community since 2015. And they wanted to learn about how air pollution impacts the effects of chronic illnesses, specifically diabetes, because that there's a high prevalence of diabetes in this community. And so we brought in an endocrinologist to speak more about that. And then folks wanted to learn more about children's health. So we brought in a pediatrician. We brought in the director from the health department to talk about resources that folks can, different channels and avenues that folks can use to address a lot of their concerns. And so trying to keep it very localized and relevant to what folks really want to learn about. Or if they don't want to learn anything at all and they just want to continue like a connection or continue to collect data. The community guides every single thing that we do. We never go in and say, this is what we're doing and this is how we're going to operate. They always guide our initiatives. And so I think that also fosters a longer relationship for follow-up and for a, sustainable connection.
Great. So shifting to thinking about data sharing, actually sharing the data with a wider audience. Similar question, what is one of the most important considerations for communities regarding data sharing? And Ethan, I wonder if I could ask you, since you were working on some mapping platforms that will be viewed, story maps and things like that.
Well, like the other panelists, I think that the future of data is open and shared. I haven't been working with the data that is as sensitive as the other panelists have. I'm just working with publicly available data that doesn't identify um, uh, random community members, or communities to that level. So I might not be the best person for that. I do have other theories about data sharing and stuff, but data should just be as open as possible at this point, as far as I'm concerned, with the type of data that I'm looking at. I think that you have to, I defer to the others on the sensitivity.
Do you have thoughts on like most compelling platforms, how you can incorporate storytelling in data in your GIS maps? Because I think that visualizing data is such an important piece of all this and figuring out how to effectively share data visualizations.
It can get really nerdy and exciting to me, but boring to others. But getting all this data together, it's kind of an art and a science. But if you can amalgamate a lot of data, um, it depends on what type of data you're collecting. Like I do a lot of drone data, which is really awesome because you can capture as much data as you want and pull out any segment of that later that becomes useful, and it doesn't really harm you to have all of that data there. But with this type of data that I'm working at, if you can put it, if you can know what all the stakeholders may be interested in, community members, whoever interest is, and if you can have that, then if it's in one place, you can serve that out from that one thing and any view using any aspect of that data and any future updates to that data and iteration of it in the long term, that you just have to adjust and update that one data set. Everybody's data can be populated out. I guess that's kind of a philosophy of workflow on data sharing.
No, but that's really interesting. Any other thoughts from panelists about, sharing data, whether that's sharing data collected to regulatory agencies, whether it's sharing it in the media, all that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that story maps are really, really powerful. And we also, if you look at our story, we also utilize some, the story map form as an intro to show the scope of nitrate contamination in our water. So yeah, I really agree. I think that a lot of it is like using data to tell a story with a narrative, and I think that there are other opportunities for us to kind of zoom in on certain communities as well if we use that format.
Great. Yeah, I totally agree. Casey, you gonna say something?
Yeah, I think just what you're saying, there's place in our work for for workflows as well. And it's actually more of an administrative process where like if our promotores are going in and submitting like their hours and reimbursements for our team to kind of like match up grant like payments and stuff like that. We have workflows that kind of do some cleaning automatically on that because we've been really stickler about like our the government funders want to see proof of like all of the reimbursement and mileage. However, our promotores are leaving from their house and going to like private farm sites that aren't like really people don't want to share that information with the government. And that's fair. And so we have internal workflows for what needs to be shared with our budgeting team versus what needs to be invoiced to the grant maker. And I know this is not really on like the agricultural workers side of things. This is more on our staff side of things, but there is this way to like use workflows, I think, with some of that qualitative and like administrative data as well. That's like really cool because then you can share the base numbers of like this is how many workers we talked to and this is how many food boxes we distributed to this community. This is like how many vaccine appointments we've helped with, and that number can kind of get pulled out and addressed publicly, and then the addresses for mileage reimbursement can go to administrative team, and then the separate data to like invoice for grant funding can get pulled out and sent to that team. So I think that workflows and those systems are definitely where we're going to be headed in order to free up a lot of administrative time and our time to actually do frontline work and not just sit there and clean data all day.
I don't have much experience with workflows, but I'm feeling like I need to now. If y'all, Ethan or Casey or any other panelists have good resources to share in developing workflows that are simple, feel free to pop those in the chat. That could be really important information for folks. So now I want to transition if there are any questions from the audience. I know Sandy had a question in the Q&A. It looks like Ethan submitted an answer for that. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand. I think you can go off mute and ask those directly to the panelists. You can also put those in the Q&A section. Oh, Sandy, I see your hands up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I asked about unpermitted facilities where they get data for those as well and didn't get an answer for that because here in the Lake Erie watershed.
There is an answer in the chat, I think.
Did I miss it? I'm sorry.
Well, maybe Ethan, you can
Yeah.
expand on that.
I would love to hear about though what her specific example in the Lake Erie watershed though as well.
Here they estimate that about 90% of the animals are in unpermitted facilities, and we mostly call them one unders. They estimate that 80% of the animals here are in a CAFO, a medium or large size CAFO as defined by US EPA. So there certainly is some of that is the smaller farms, but the bulk of the animals are in large facilities and the bulk of those are not permitted. And
this
so
is
that
why,
was, and then
this is why
the other question, the other
go ahead.
question I had was, in terms of Nebraska, I mean, it's awesome. I don't know how many states require monitoring at CAFOs. I don't know of any, I don't know of anyone up here in the Great Lakes, and maybe I'm just uninformed and I'm open to that. But certainly in Ohio, there are no CAFOs that I know of that require any monitoring. So there is no monitoring data. We have stream monitoring data around the CAFOs, which we've done an analysis of by Marquette in Wisconsin, and they estimate that every time you had a CAFO, you had 5% DRP to the watershed, to the streams. But that was rejected pretty much by EPA, although it's now been published. So we've asked them to reconsider it, but it's really hard to do that. And so I'm jealous of Nebraska having monitoring. Maybe they require it in the permitting. I don't know how many other states do that. Maybe that's something more of us need to ask for. I doubt that we'll get it.
Yeah, there's a real push for non-accountability. I guess I'll just start off by saying this is why it's so this is a great meeting, and to have input for people like me that know how to use certain tools, have input with people with knowledge like you do. And I knew that we needed to. I think that's a great question. We need to look at these unpermitted facilities. And I think just the concept of quantifying that, being like how much is within their landscape is permanent facilities, and how how much in our landscape is non-permanent facilities. I mean, just having that knowledge alone is a step in the right direction. We don't have any way of knowing that right now that I know of. I think we may be able to look through production records, maybe USDA Ag Census, and kind of back trace it to try to figure out how many animals might be there based on production metrics. Also, I know that there's people out there pre-training deep learning models to look at satellite data and remote sense data to look for barns in association with lagoons to help generalize that. As far as the permitting thing, or as far as the accountability aspect of monitoring, I think a lot of us are in that same boat. And Missouri, our DNR has a lot of regulatory capture right now with our Clean Water Commission, which was mentioned yesterday, that needs to, we need to do something about. We also need to do a better job of whomever is doing stream teams work, and that needs to be able to help communicate their data and their findings so that can kind of be scaled out. I think your questions are right there. This is what we need to do. I think collectively we need to come up with a strategy to be able to identify all these sources, not just the permitted sources. So I'm open for suggestions and ideas on how to do that as well.
Just so you know that we did have EWG do the satellite data, and that's where the unpermitted versus permitted information I'm quoting comes from. The NELPC did it. And the other gap that I'm seeing and I'm hearing from everybody here that maybe we all should be looking more at is nitrate in wells in proximity to CAFOs for drinking water. And I know Isaac Walton League has a program out there that they're starting with this. And I think that data, because I don't know that we're ever going to get the governments to require the CAFOs to put in monitoring that we'd all absolutely like. But if there was more testing of drinking water in areas over time, especially if we were able to show nitrate levels changing, that could be a game changer.
Yeah, it definitely could. I agree with you completely. I mean, getting accurate and consistent comprehensive data is extremely important when we're talking about these nutrients that are nutrient pollution likely caused by industrial livestock facilities. Are there
Just let me
any?
add one more comment. One other thing on the ag census issue, we've done a pretty thorough analysis of all the states around the country on ag census, and where we found the most gap is on the layered chickens. Almost 40% of them, from what we can tell, are not reported. In a state like Delaware, where they only have 3 counties, not only are they not reported by county because of the de-exemption in the NAS rules, they're also, the state of Delaware, if you look at layered chickens, has 0 chickens reported and for layered, and that's absolutely absurd. So, and I think Kansas was another big one we found, and there were some other gaping holes, anyway.
Sandy,
Yeah, that's a great point, and seeing these big gaps that we need to fill. Are there any other questions? I know we have a couple minutes left, so I just want to make sure.
Sandy, is that data available from EWG on the remote sensing results?
For a second. Oh no.
I see your comment in the chat, Kathy.
I'm sorry. Yeah, can you ask that again? It cut
Is-
out and I don't know what happened to my machine.
Is the remote sensing data available from EWG?
Yeah. The reports are certainly online. There's 2 of them, one in 2019. If you just do EWG, CAFOs, Lake Erie, whatever, you'll see two reports, one in 2019 and one in 2022, and it'll tell you, it'll give you the data. The stuff from
Right.
Raft and Meyer at Wisconsin and whatever, where they did the downstream continuous monitoring, I think we can also get a hold of that. They did a ton of spreadsheet data showing the increases over time based on the satellite data, because that's where we have most of our stuff coming from.
That's
Is from
great.
the
Thanks.
Awesome. All right, well, we're coming to the end of time. If there are any
sorry.
further questions, feel free to post in the chat and we can try, or the Q&A, we can respond to those with text. And just thank you all for your engagement. Thank you to the panelists for your willingness to spend your time at this event and share about your work. That was really awesome. To everyone who's wondering about getting the resources we shared, we can definitely follow up with everyone and provide links to all the panelists' work and any other important information. We encourage people to learn more about this work and talk more within your community about this and how you all can start collecting data. If you're already doing it, how you can do it to really achieve some systems change, some positive change in your area. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Sherry. And thanks again, everyone. Really appreciate all of you.
Thank you, Cole. That was an amazing conversation. I really appreciate the panelists and you for kind of exploring all of the power of data and also the stories that go along with that data. So I appreciate all of you for joining us today. And then the great questions that were coming through in the chat. Seriously terrific conversation. So I actually think I think we're going to go to a break right now. Is that right, Mark?
Yep, let's head to a break for about 10 minutes. Then you'll do a little introduction when we have our next panel.
Okay, sounds good. So everybody take a quick break for 10 minutes and then we'll gather again and then we'll get going on our fourth panel for today and keep going with the day. Thank you so much.
Yep, if you come back about 10 minutes after the hour, we'll be ready to go. Thank you. Okay, everybody, we're coming back now here in just a moment. We're going to get started with our second panel. I'm going to hand it over to Sherry for the second panel of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again for the afternoon sessions of our SRAP Live 2024 Summit. So our second panel, as I mentioned earlier, is going to explore opportunities for working together and amplifying voices to achieve large-scale food systems change. I am super excited to introduce a friend of SRAP and consultant, Jake Davis. He works as an entrepreneur, farmer, consultant, and policy advisor. With a bachelor's degree in agriculture education from the University of Missouri and a master's in public administration from the Harry S. Truman School of Public Affairs, Jake has dedicated his career to building a better farm and food system through market development and policy reform. Over the past decade, he has provided market and policy expertise to national NGOs like the National Audubon Society, Organization for Competitive Markets, the Berry Center, and most recently as the National Policy Director for Family Farm Action. Between 2018 and 2020, he collaborated in drafting 4 landmark pieces of legislation to create structural reform of federal farm policy and has advised political candidates from state house to presidential on farm and food issues. He is a policy powerhouse, and we are super excited to have him with us today on our panel. He's going to be moderating the discussion. He currently farms in central Missouri, producing pasture-raised pork and vegetables. So Jake, I will let you take it over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Good to see you and good to see you all. Thanks for having me and thanks for the excited for us to talk more in this panel about the power of collaboration, quite honestly, which is the theme of our discussion here, and how important it is in the face of such sort of daunting and a challenging industry that we're up against that has sort of aggregated a huge amount of power, which I know you're going to hear more about and probably have heard a lot about already through these panels, but you're going to hear more about in our keynote address in just a little while. But in the face of that industry power, it is critically important that we find ways to collaborate. And SRAP has, I just wanted to congratulate Sherry and the team at SRAP for all the collaborative work that they have done to work on projects all the way from working with current and former contract growers, all the way to pasture pork and poultry producers, to file briefs at the Supreme Court and with community members, to pass legislation and with folks to push back against federal regulation and everything in between, quite honestly. So we're going to spend time talking about more of that collaboration in this panel, but just wanted to highlight briefly that SRAP is a great place for that intersection of collaboration to occur. So as we're talking about these, it's a great opportunity to think about how we broaden the work that we're all doing, both with SRAP and all the organizations involved in the summit. So with that, I want to just start out by introducing our first Starla Becker-Tillinghast. Starla Becker-Tillinghast is from Lynn County, Oregon, and a lot of us had our eyes on Oregon this past year for a major development related to and public policy. But Starla had a firsthand experience of that as a community member. She's a critical care nurse in her community, but also has deep farming roots and had her own dairy farm at age 15 and milk and toted cans of milk to the local town. And also has been an active community advocate there in Oregon. So, Starla, I wanted to just give you a few seconds before we dig into our conversation about the work you all have been doing in Oregon, for you to just say a few minutes more about what we should know, or maybe just a few seconds more about what we should know about your community in Oregon and your background there.
Thank you. Our community is small. We're in the Willamette Valley. It's really green. We have a lot of clean water, a lot of farmers, a lot of grass seed farmers, dairies, a lot of dairies that are organic, let their cows graze. They do a really good job at that. We're really getting into hazelnuts too as well. So definitely a lot of ag here and a lot of timber.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we started out. Many of us, our ancestors came over in the covered wagons and we're still here. Not me, but most of us. And then, we love it. We love it here.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, as I mentioned, you had a real front row seat for the work that was done, and many of us, including myself, have admired the work that you all did from afar and have been really appreciative of the organizing and, quite honestly, the collaborative effort that existed in Oregon that started around a concept of putting a moratorium on factory farms and ultimately resulted in at the state level in a long time an SB 85. And so maybe before we talk about sort of the legislation and what resulted, I'd love for you to say more about why folks came together, and then what you saw and how folks were coming together to sort of fight this fight both in your local community and at the State House.
Yeah, I'd love to tell you. So I prepared a lot of things, one about organizing, and I wanted to say that yesterday, those gals sharing about the biogas, they shared the perfect recipe how to organize and mobilize. I'm not going to repeat that because it was so perfect. It's what we did. And I was just thinking also last night how, some people have lifelong goals. They're going to write a book, build a house, the stuff they've planned. And when I was trying to put 4 years of what we did into 5 minutes, it was kind of hard. There's so much that went on. And I realized that when we stood up and we fought to keep them away from our water in our communities, we were fighting for our lives and their lives. And that sort of was, you could almost call that a lifetime goal. And I'm thankful for everybody else in this group that's trying so hard to keep communities livable, water's clean, and protect our small farmers. We did realize there was a plan in place. It probably been in place a lot longer than we knew. When one of the gals who worked at a local feed store saw a Foster Farms landman tag on somebody and asked him about it. And he's talking about, well, we've got plans for these 5 places. And they're going to, some of them will have 60 by 600 foot barns. And we'll be raising probably 6 million chickens a year there. And we want to keep this in a 12-mile radius in this wet, heavily populated Willamette Valley. And she learned one of those places was actually near her road. And he's saying, well, we're going to keep the wealthy people's house. We're going to put a buffer up so they won't really notice us. And and then she says, well, what about that little red house on the corner? And he goes, oh, that's just 2 people live there. They don't have enough money to do anything about us. She's an SRAP member now. Also, we were noticing, that whole thing about a central place to communicate. So when a website was established post haste, after we scrambled, we were all of us, once the earth movers moved into the other neighbors' places, they believed it. It was hard to believe this was true, right? We were a scramble to find who can help us. Where do you look? We went online and we actually found the former director of SRAP who knew how to organize this. And we mobilized really quickly, thank goodness, with that. I was going to say too, this coming to me, listening to everybody talk, how important this centralized data is, ways to share, kind of like your brain trust. There's so much information out there and it's so hard to find it when you're scrambling. I'd just like to encourage us to it would be very cool to have one central place for a way to contact all these people that have been on here today. Now, we had meetings, we had community meetings. One of our information systems, I called it, she had a yard sign on her pickup. And I just remember one day I saw her driving down the freeway And the yard sign was so well done that I could read the website, where to go to find out information about this. She was like one of our mobile notification systems. We talked to everybody we could. Like I said, informational meetings, dead of winter, COVID, masks, but we just would not shut up. Then when it came time to testimony, we're trying to facilitate our community members. Some of the people here, they don't even have internet. The internet doesn't work that well, or they don't even use computers. They're old farmers. I mean, they're not old, but they're just old school. And we helped those people. We helped people testify that didn't have the means to, because all of this was happening online. We pulled them in and like set up a computer for them, encouraged them, stood there with them while they testified. We transcribed letters for people. I think sometimes the officials need to hear from the most, the voices that need to be heard the most, the farmers, those people who are really living the life. They're shy. They don't want to speak up against other farmers. They feel really bad about that, but their voices are so important, and we really try to facilitate that. And then finally, when it came time to testify, you can Google the OLIS site SB-85 and see there were over 800 testimonies. And there were mistakes made on those testimonies. And one of our team members and an IT tech from the government fixed those mistakes, because things, again, are confusing and they're really hard to get to. So that was some of the ways that we helped get people, hitched up there with getting their voices heard. And I think that's so important. Another thing is we argued with science. Sometimes you can get really worked up and you're so angry, it's hard to keep sense of what you're doing. And we used proof. We used links in our letters to show them what our proof was. The school administrator actually got Oregon Health Authority to do a lit review on the health for children, because one was going to be placed right next to a school, and they gave us credibility. I just wanted to leave a little bit. Be careful what you argue. I've seen people lose their fights by bringing hot political topics in. Immigration is really touchy and scary. Like we heard earlier, it's so scary for the workers. And things like animal rights, that just about lost us at the end, because when that came in, all of a sudden they thought that's what we were after. And we've always just been ag people fighting to keep our ag as it is and keep our waters clean. Holding decorum is extremely vital. It's hard to do. If you're the kind of feisty person that's going to stand up and fight for your community, you're also the person that's probably going to be wanting to, shake a few people and make them really listen to you. And it was so hard to continue to keep a decorum. And you need to be respectful to all the officials you're dealing with. I think that's very important. Kendra kept telling us, she said, remember, this is a sprint, it's a marathon. And I'd like to add, it's like a chess game and sometimes a wing and a prayer. And I say, we've got a right to farm, but we sure don't have a right to harm. And thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for sort of telling us a little bit about the experience you had. I'd love to have you follow up a little bit with just, this was, to your point, such a long and sometimes a fast-paced and sometimes a slow-paced fight and a persistent fight. But ultimately, the work you all did and lots of folks did in Oregon resulted in SB 85 passing. Could more about sort of what SB 85 does, and in particular, I want to hear about what your community recently was enabled to do because of the new law.
Yeah. Well, I always say, if you've got a problem and a complaint, you need to come with a solve. You just can't say something's wrong without finding a way to fix it. And I must say here at this point too, we have the benefit of people helping us with research. I'd like to call out again, Kendra did yesterday, Jean Hargenberger. She was so helpful. I've got boxes and boxes of research, and I researched then the setbacks. And so that's what SB 85 gave us. It closed a loophole with water. And then it also gave us, the counties, the power to have a setback. And we went to the county. I had researched both with like my relatives, they're all farmers in other states. Like, what do you think is setbacks? What's fair? What do you think? Because we only had like 50 feet. Somebody was putting a litter shed 50 feet from a property line. And that's just not good. And so we had researched with, actual people. And then I went on and did a search across the states trying to find setbacks for any of the states. Some states don't even have setbacks, by the way. This one I called Washington, I think it was, and they couldn't figure out what their setback was, but I got a good paper about pig and cow manure out of them. So, sometimes it's sharing information again. So we did. We went to the county, we went to the commissioners and we talked to them and we shared our research on that. I gave them, what we printed out with links and proof. And there were 2 meetings again, where we again gave testimonies, sometimes last minute, sometimes with husbands having open heart surgery the next day. But we managed to get in there and give our testimony. And in the end, even though our commissioners are totally pro-ag and they support our ag and timber industry, they were able themselves to set our setback, and it's a wonderful thing, although we're going to continue to monitor as long as we can.
Yeah, great. And what is the current result, or maybe the current state of Foster Farms work there in Oregon because of that?
Oh, I think they're pretty discouraged. 2 of the 3 actual places that we're working on permits are for sale. The third one, just today, it's been out in the news that the ODA and DEQ pulled the permit and are reconsidering because their placement was on such wet ground. That was one of our big fights. And again, we didn't have the benefit of maps. We're scotch taping photographs together. We're getting a few little drone shots. We're showing flood shots. I paid a community college to give me their aerial shots from 1935. Showing water movement. That's kind of how unsophisticated we are. But our argument was it's too wet, and right now the state has pulled the permit and is going to give 6 months consideration. So we're just kind of still hanging in on that one.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for telling us some of your story, and I want to circle back around to you in a little bit, but I want to get the rest of our panel introduced, and and just as a reminder to folks, we're going to save a little bit of time towards the end of the conversation. So if you have, please drop them into the chat, and we'll try to get back to those in a few minutes. But I want to introduce our next panelist, Emily Miller, who is a staff attorney for Food and Water Watch. She focuses her work on the air and water pollution associated with factory farms, and Emily holds a JD from the University of Berkeley, and is currently located or headquartered in Colorado. Emily, I want to just bring you in and have you share a few seconds about, for folks that are listening who might not be familiar with Food and Water Watch, maybe if you can tell us just a little bit, the sort of thumbnail does.
Sure, and thanks for having me. So Food and Water Watch is a national environmental advocacy organization, and we fight on 3 main fronts, on food, on climate and energy, and on clean and safe water. And our mission really is to mobilize regular people to fight for solutions to some of our most pressing food, water, and climate issues, and really take on some of those big, powerful economic interests that are polluting our planet and our communities. And I particularly work on our campaign to ban factory farms.
Great. Thank you for being here. And speaking of collaboration, which is certainly the theme of our panel here today, I know that Food and Water Watch was active in where possible in the work in Oregon. And so thanks for the efforts that you put in on Starla's work there. But I want to turn to our conversation a little bit towards federal policy, and particularly policy around EPA's regulation, or the Environmental Protection Agency's regulations of factory farms. We heard of some factory farms. We heard of some conversation and that sort of thing that, as Starla was chatting, I wonder if you could tell us more about the work that you're doing to petition for updating of the rulemaking and of the regulatory sort of framework that exists farms and sort of how those processes work.
Yeah, definitely. So our work on this front has really been a case study in EPA's refusal to treat factory farms like every other industrial water polluter. For many decades, the EPA has repeatedly given the industry a free pass to pollute through really weak and ineffective clean water regulation. And beginning in 2017, Food and Water Watch and a coalition of 32 environmental and environmental justice groups set out to change that by filing a petition for rulemaking urging EPA to update and strengthen its clean water program for factory farms. And in so doing, to finally hold the industry accountable for its water pollution. And before I dive into the specifics of the petition and EPA's response and our current ensuing lawsuit, I just wanted to step back and give a brief overview of some of the key issues with factory farm water pollution and EPA's lax regulation of it. So as I'm sure many of you know, industrial scale factory farms that confine thousands or millions of animals at a time, they generate vast quantities of waste containing a lot of dangerous pollutants like nutrients, pathogens, pharmaceuticals, heavy metals. And this waste ends up getting hyper concentrated in certain communities and watersheds where it creates huge problems. So these operations essentially are operating like sewerless cities, and they dump millions of gallons of untreated waste onto fields where it leaches into soils and groundwater and also runs off into nearby waterways. So the massive growth of this industry over the past few decades has led to widespread water pollution. And it's contaminated thousands upon thousands of miles of waterways, drinking water sources, recreational waters, with some really devastating impacts environmentally and health-wise for communities and ecosystems that rely on those resources. So the Clean Water Act is our nation's federal premier water pollution control law, and it's supposed to rein in pollution from industrial polluters like factory farms through a permit system that imposes strict requirements on facilities to prevent and control their discharge of waste to waterways. But for the past 50 years, as long as the law has been around, EPA has really shirked its Clean Water Act obligations with respect to factory farms through weak and completely ineffective regulation. So for instance, because of gaping loopholes in EPA's rules, there are thousands of operations that discharge pollution to waterways without required permits. So by EPA's own estimate, 75% of CAFOs discharge pollution and therefore need a clean water permit. However, less than 30% of these CAFOs actually have them. So if you do out the math, that means that there are almost 10,000 factory farms across the country that are operating illegally and discharging pollution completely unchecked. So lack of permitting is one really big problem. The other is that for the permits that do exist, they do a very poor job of actually controlling pollution. So for instance, pollution standards that govern land application are focused on maximizing crop yield rather than on protecting water quality. And the permitting regulations don't even address numerous pollutants of concern in CAFO waste streams like antibiotics and heavy metals. They just ignore them completely. So nevertheless, EPA has kind of sat back and not done anything to address these really obvious problems for many, many years. So it's against that backdrop that our coalition filed a petition for rulemaking in March of 2017, calling on the agency to fix its broken program. And we laid out kind of a roadmap for reform and made a series of recommendations to ensure that one, all discharging CAFOs would be subject to permits, and two, that those permits would actually be effective at controlling water pollution. So recommendations included things like establishing presumptions that large CAFOs discharge and need to be permitted, closing regulatory loopholes like the agricultural stormwater exemption that have allowed operators to evade permitting altogether, and tightening up pollution standards and monitoring requirements contained within permits. It took EPA 6.5 years to answer our petition, and we actually had to sue them to force the agency to issue their response, which they did in August of 2023. And they denied our petition in full. They instead committed to doing two things. One, they'll be conducting a detailed study of CAFO water pollution to determine whether the agency should in fact strengthen CAFO pollution standards that get written into permits. And two, EPA is forming an advisory committee made up of interested stakeholders like industry, public health, community advocates to further evaluate the problem and provide recommendations to the agencies. So while these commitments are not nothing, our coalition ultimately determined that the proposed committee and study process is not enough, and it can't take the place of actual updated regulations. For one, EPA has a lot of information in front of it already. That's more than enough for it to act now. And the proposed process is going to take years to complete. And its result will be non-binding recommendations that EPA is under no obligation to actually act on. So we're not settling for this deferred action approach. We're going to be fighting now on multiple fronts. We're engaging in the detailed study process and the committee process. But at the same time, Food and Water Watch and 12 of our co-petitioners have filed a lawsuit in federal court against EPA, challenging its refusal to strengthen its CAFO clean water rules. And we're arguing that EPA's refusal to fix its broken CAFO program through a rulemaking is unlawful because it ignores a mountain of evidence supporting the need for action, and it fails to uphold its Clean Water Act obligations to effectively regulate the industry's pollution. So I will leave it there, but just bringing it back to collaboration, the theme of the panel, I just want to emphasize that this has been a really a team effort for many, many years. It's involved lawyers, frontline community members, national groups, state-based orgs that kind of represent some of the biggest CAFO country areas, and community-based organizations that are fighting on the ground. So we're making headway together. The fight for kind of changing the national landscape of CAFO water pollution control is far from over, but we're in it for the long haul.
Great. Thank you, Emily. And just to, that is I know have been such a long fight for Food and Water Watch and the coalition involved. For those of us who are maybe not attorneys and aren't going to engage in full suing of EPA, what are the things that community members, other organizations can do to help your efforts and both the group of attorneys involved and the organization sort of headlining the litigation?
Yeah, well, we've already gotten like a really amazing groundswell of support from scientists and environmental justice groups and family farm organizations, SRAP included, who filed friend of the court briefs in support of our case, which was great. And while we're hoping our lawsuit can drive change on a faster timeline, I'd say it's also really important for sustainable agriculture and environmental movement allies and community members to engage in the public process that EPA has established for evaluating the CAFO program. Because meaningful participation in the detailed study and the committee work will help ensure that they're not just empty promises on the agency's part, and they're not things that can just be railroaded by industry actors who will surely be doing everything in their power to oppose stronger regulations. In fact, all of the big industry groups have already intervened into our case to oppose us. So yeah, taking part in the detailed study, submitting information, community water quality data to EPA, anything that helps our case would be really helpful. And then once that committee also gets off the ground, participating in that process as well.
Great, thank you. And like I mentioned, we're going to be back around with some questions in a couple of minutes. Folks, don't hesitate to put questions for Emily into our chat, and we'll get back to those as soon as we can. I want to round out our panel here by introducing Craig Watts, who leads the Contract Grower Transition Program at SRAP, and has also been featured in places like This Week Tonight with John Oliver and many documentaries, and quoted in a huge number of major press publications talking about the harms of the sort of corporate integrators and mega meat packers that control this industry. And so, Craig, I wanted to give you just maybe 30, 45 seconds to tell folks why you might be the most famous former contract grower that I know.
Oh, I was the only one dumb enough to say anything. No, I can't really explain it, Jake. It was just the culmination of a lot of little things. It was like the ag stuff was happening. I mean, we had just come off a very huge disappointment with the GIPSA rule back in 2010, kind of getting no support from the administration. And I had an opportunity to work with, it was actually an animal welfare organization, Compassion and World Farming, because I figured out, like, I had done some stuff in print before, and the integrators never said a word about that, but I saw Food Inc. and I saw the impact that Carol Morrison's piece had in it, and there just too much time had lapsed. And I said, the video, that the folks need to see what's going on inside these houses. So it was just it was like lightning in a bottle, dude. That's all I can tell you. It was the right place, the right person at the right time. And a 5-minute YouTube hit the New York Times, hit the Reddit board. People saw what was actually going on inside these facilities, and it upset them. And that was the plan. They needed to know what things really were, not the red barn and the white picket fence and the nice Norman Rockwell mom and pop farmer that you see on these labels, because it looks nothing like that on the ground. And media just picked it up, and away we went.
Yeah, well, thanks for being that person willing to say something, Craig. And Craig's being modest. He was the 2015 Whistleblower of the Year, and has won the Farm Aid Spirit Award, and a number of great things, and excited to have him here on this panel. But in particular, Craig just mentioned this idea of the GIPSA rules, and so some may be unfamiliar with this law that we have, a 100-year-old law called the Packers and Stockyards Act, create a level playing field between meat packers, or what sometimes we'll refer to as integrators, and independent farmers and contract folks who are under contract with them, and a very predatory system, because much like Emily was just referring to, the EPA regulations not being enforced and not doing what is in law. Also, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has, for a bunch of reasons, which we could spend hours on, including federal courts watering down the Packers and Stockyards legal strength. We had this call for a new set of rules around the Packers and Stockyards law many years ago in 2008, and Craig was already active in the movement in one way or another at that point. And that process took a very long time. And so, Craig, I wanted you to just say a little bit more about the sort of long road to getting new rules for under the Packers and Stockyards Act, and sort of what has happened over the last year or two to sort of change to that level playing field and trying to hold meat packers accountable for their sort of irresponsible actions here.
Sure. It really goes back, and I think I've got the date right. I think it was actually 1985 when a lady named Mary Klaus, who was I think she was a breeder grower here in North Carolina, stepped in to the Rural Advancement Foundation International's office in Pittsboro, North Carolina, and just explained to them what was happening with the contract poultry farmers. And we were talking about collaborations, and that's like the first group that like took contract farmers in that we could collaborate with. It wasn't an unlikely ally because RAFI was already doing stuff with farmers, just not specifically to contract farmers. Now, 1985 was several years before I got into the business. And so I got into the business in 1992, and I had a little honeymoon phase where everything was okay, and then it got very evident that I was no longer in control of my own farm, and I had really made a mistake. So we started forming organizations, and this was before broadband internet and social media and all that stuff. And we did it old school, man. We went to people's houses, we sat around kitchen tables, and we got folks signed up, and we had some quite strong organizations. That I know in North Carolina we had one, the Delmarva had one, Alabama had one, the Virginias had one. And what was happening was the companies were starting to ride by where the folks were meeting, and they were taking pictures of the people's cars in the parking lots. And that, if say they met on a Friday or a Saturday, well, Monday morning they were calling these people in one at a time, saying, "Hey, man, if you don't want to grow chickens for us anymore, you don't have to." So that pretty much killed the contract grower organizations, trying to do it by themselves. So we realized very quickly that the farmers couldn't do it alone. So that was kind of it was just bothering me to no end that they had that much control over somebody's life, right? And so we started working with the RAFI, and a couple of the folks got to go up to the Hill and testify before the Senate Ag Committee and the House Ag Committee. And they were both people I knew, both worked with both of them, both fine folks. They went and did that, and what they got for that testimony was one got back to North Carolina. She got her contract pulled immediately and had no more income coming in from her farm. The other gentleman was a guy, he was a little south of me. I won't get no specifics about it, but he got back, he got his contract pulled, and he wound up hanging himself in his poultry houses. So that was kind of a big wake up call that, this is BS, this can't happen. So really got involved with RAFI a good bit and pushing for these gypsum rules. Finally, a few more farmers are starting to speak out. So we had a little committee, and then really started forming the Unlikely Allies. I mean, Emily mentioned a while ago that Food and Water Watch was a national environmental organization. Well, after RAFI, the first organization I worked with was Food and Water Watch. That just, factory farmer and an environmental organization should be happening. But those conversations had to happen, and I think that made a strong alliance because there's a hub and a spoke here, right? The hub of the problem is the industry and the lack of respect for the farmers. They're not treated as relative, as integral as they are to the business. They are treated as an expendable resource, much like a hammer or a screwdriver that you can throw away. So the more I could get that story in front of other organizations, then the formation of CCAR, and that's nine nonprofits now that we work with, and I work with other organizations, even the one I work that I'm employed with now. So that's been like I said, the collaboration has been the key. What happened in 2008 was in 2008, the Farm Bill, the Congress directed the USDA to write some rules to address some of these problems that we'd brought up over the years. And Obama came in 2009, I think, and it was about 2010 before they actually published those rules. And they were pretty good. I mean, they were basically what we had written and sent up to the USDA to do, but then the industry got involved with it, and they got the comments periods extended. The landscape in DC changed. And so the support for it just kind of went away. I mean, we had the guy with the pretty much handpicked that we wanted to head up GIPSA, Dudley Butler, and he just got frustrated, and he just threw his hands up and walked away. So that was kind of disappointing, but some of us just kept fighting, and it was, and it would kind of keep coming up, and then it would kind of get, and then the Congress would do this, what I'm talking about, Jake, what they would defund.
Put place of right.
They would defund. They would make, yeah, they would put riders on the appropriations bill where the USDA, even if the rules are there, they weren't going to fund them to complete them. So that went on for years and years and years. But now we finally got an administration. God bless them. These issues are now being talked about from the pulpit of the President of the United States. We didn't see that even with Obama. We didn't see that. Biden has done a much better job. It seems like we have the right folks in the right places right now. We've got two really good rules, strong rules coming out: the transparency in poultry growing arrangements, where they have to disclose issues that we never knew about before, because when you raise birds for a poultry integrator, you don't own the birds. The integrator supplies you the birds, so, and the feed. So what you wind up with is all inputs are not equal, but yet farmers are competing in this Machiavellian Thunderdome 10 men enter, 5 men leave tournament system, where they have to compete with one another on inputs that are not the same. It's not an evaluation of farmers' management. The money he makes is like a rigged lottery, I think, as Bob Taylor accurately put it. So, and then we have the market integrity rule, and that deals with discrimination and deceptive practices, which is cool. And then there's two more on the horizon, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jake. One of them's they're going to really looking at this poultry tournament system. And then the second thing is they're going to look at this impossible standard that the courts have held up that's called harm to competition, meaning for me to bring a case under the Packers and Stockyards Act, the GIPSA stuff, I have to prove that what they did to me harmed competition across the entire country, meaning if they somehow hoodooed me, it had to affect the price of chicken on the shelf somewhere in California. It's an impossible standard. It's ridiculous. And we really, that's the one I think is important, Jake, that when if we could get that solved and get that regulation in place, I think a lot of these other rules that have passed they're just building blocks to having good cases. And then that way the USDA can actually do their job.
Yeah, Craig, very good. And thank you for all the work and that was a great recap of sort of the history. I wonder if maybe you might just say, because I think a lot of us often hear about rules and regulations and litigation and those things that seem sort of beyond a lot of us. I wonder if you might just highlight a couple of the folks, individuals or organizations that are sort of participators or people who made sort of waves in this fight for better Packers and Stockyards rules over the years, and just to highlight where they came from and why their voices mattered.
Well, I mean, it's certainly the Rural Advancement Foundation International here in Pittsburgh. Like I said, that was the first group I started working with. They were they just held my hand. I mean, they taught me how to do media, and they taught me how to do a hill visit. They used to have to kick me under the table every once in a while because I wasn't the most polished fella in the world that went to the hill. But anyway, there was golly, I mean, Food and Water Watch were great. Patty Lavera and Patrick Woodall, thought the world of them. National Farmers Union had met with them a little bit. NSAC. The National Sustainable Agricultural Coalition was very instrumental, and the whole CCAR movement, those 9 nonprofits that are part of CCAR were great. And I have to just give a shout out to Steve Etka, who's our quasi lobbyist in DC, who fights for us, and he knows the ins and outs of the hills, and he really could go to the dark side and make probably 10 times more money than he's making now. But he's been a true champion for our issues for as long as I've been involved, with 20 years at least. So, props to him. 2014, when the expose had not come out, the fall of 2014, I got a call from Scott Marlowe from RAFI. He said, "You want to meet Willie Nelson?" I said, "Yeah, right. Okay, sure." And who doesn't want to meet Willie Nelson, right? So sure enough, next thing I knew, I was on Willie Nelson's bus, and they were inviting myself and KW, who was a former contract poultry grower, to do the press conference at Farm Aid at 2014. That year, we got to sit up on the stage with the board members, and that was just like, I knew we had arrived at that point. That was like the biggest stage ever. And then right on the heels of that was the expose. So we had some good momentum. So, oh gosh, the Waterkeeper Alliance. I mean, those folks have been SRAP. There's just too many. I'll leave somebody out, and I don't want to make anybody mad.
Yeah, no, it's great. I just wanted you to. That was very helpful, because it's where we often, and this sort of leads me to my next question for all of you, which is, I want to just take a second and get each of you to sort of react to. We often don't know what we don't know, and we need both people who have different sets of professional experience from different areas. So if we work in the environmental space, sometimes we need to talk more to farmers or health professionals and vice versa. What can each of you, if you just had to distill sort of one piece of advice about trying to build sort of coalitions of unlikely allies, what have you learned through all these sort of layers of work about how to best go about that, or maybe even how to just get started doing that work if you've had that experience? And maybe we'll start with Emily.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think even for groups or people that have kind of different main focuses and interests, there's always a through line that we can all connect with. So whether you are an environmental organization primarily or a farm organization primarily, we can agree on the big corporate players that are responsible for both environmental pollution and exploiting the farmer. We need to focus our efforts on them, right? So I think it's really just about distilling what our common interests are and focusing on those things together.
Yeah, great. Starla, what's your thoughts?
One thing, knowing what you're fighting, right? What your goal is. And you got to know somebody that knows somebody, and that leads to other stuff. Because we did a frantic online search and we tapped into Kindra, we were able to make those connections with everybody else. And I don't even know who all was helping us. Many were totally grateful. And that's why I think we need one spot, a landing page that can help direct people like us right away to all of this brain trust. I feel that very strongly. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Craig, go ahead.
I love the landing page idea. I was sitting in a meeting in Durham, North Carolina, and it was me and a couple of more farmers with that had factory farms. And there was some waterkeeper folks, and there were some students there who were sick of the big companies like Cisco controlling all their food on campus. And then there was some workers from the plants. And so as we go around that room and we're all doing our little spiel, I'm sitting there thinking we're all telling the same story. So I think Emily hit it right on. I mean, you identified the enemy. I mean, Food and Water Watch has never allowed or stole from me. The EPA's never allowed or stole from me. That's right. But the company that I was contracted with definitely did. So define the enemy and don't be scared to have that conversation. You'd be surprised, how it's not really that uncomfortable once you define the enemy and you find that common ground, because 98% of the stuff we're telling the same story. We'll fight over that other 2% 10 years down the road, but we got other stuff to worry about right now.
Yeah, great. And just a reminder, folks, I do want to turn to audience questions in just a moment. I have at least one more here, but obviously, as you're thinking about questions, feel free to drop them in, and we're going to turn to those in just a couple of minutes. So one of the things that, and Craig, you couldn't have teed me up better with that last response is sometimes about the industry and that sort of thing in sort of very broad terms, and maybe not so far as defining quote unquote the enemy. But I would love for the three of you to sort of think about and share with us sort of how you guys define what it is we're up against, what the forces, who are and what are the forces that we're up against in this fight to bring about change. And you were willing to say the enemy. Maybe I'll start with you and work back with to the others.
So your question is,
yeah, who's the enemy in your mind, Craig? Since you just described it.
Well, there was a signature on a contract right above mine, and that's who my enemy was. Right? It was real easy for me to define, but it's it's the entire system. There's just so much systematic problems in it. I mean, you've got the environmental issues, you've got the animal issues, you've got farmer issues, you've got communities getting torn apart at the seams. I mean, who's doing all this? I mean, it's not like I said, it's not the agencies. It's just a handful of companies, and the food supply chain is so concentrated in the last few decades. Not only are you fighting these multi-billion-dollar international corporations, but then they also swing a very big stick politically, whether it's locally, whether it's statewide, or whether it's on the federal level. So you're fighting a lot of dollars. You're fighting a lot of political influence. And to be quite honest with you, if you remember back, and there's people on these panels that are way smarter than I am, but I did read The Wealth of Nations, and Adam Smith warned against the monopsony kind of situations, as right behind political influence comes corruption. And I think there's enough evidence with some court cases that are out there now that really point to, the industry has done a lot to help us expose itself, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, great. And Starla, in your community, how did you all think about the opposition? If you may not want to use the word enemy, but how did you sort of think about the opposition and who they were and what kind of things you were up against?
Well, it was hard. We're not used to, we hardly knew anything. I didn't even know what integrator meant when all this started. And you just kind of think it's the grower had this idea to do this, and that's not fair. The grower's just a guy trying to make a living, maybe doing what's been family tradition. And so he's not even the bad guy. And I feel like a lot of hate got focused on them when really we're fighting not only integrator, but this huge corporations that are based on so much money. Some states are different than others. I noticed like a state like Oklahoma, or like, for instance, Nebraska, whose governor owns CAFOs, and in Oklahoma, who there's so much wealth and oil and influence in government that I think each state is a little bit different, but in the end, it's the main companies. They're kind of trying to make a living, but maybe, power and money corrupts. I wish I knew how to solve all this stuff, but it's a hard one.
No, that's great. No, that's great. That's very good. And Emily, your thought about sort of when you all are trying to sort of get our government, what is supposed to be our government, to sort of be responsive, and things like your petition is denied and so on. Sort of how do you all think about sort of that opposition and their power in the system?
Yeah, I mean, I think Starla and Craig really nailed it, that there are a few very powerful, very wealthy corporate monopolies that are pulling the strings, that are dictating the contract terms, that are prescribing the environmental management practices that are followed, that are lining the pockets of people to gain political influence in agencies and how they regulate them, and legislatures and how they legislate around these issues. So yes, while a lot of our work is focused on improving the regulation, and while that might seem like we're targeting the government as the enemy, that's not the case. We are trying to prod the government to do its job and hold the true polluters and people responsible accountable for their actions.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's turn to some actions accumulating. So, Mark, do you want to just help us sort of elevate a few of those audience questions, and I'll try to guide the conversation further, or jump in where useful as well as we're going through this.
No problem. Can you hear me, everybody? Okay, wonderful. So first question, we have a couple of questions here. They're all sort of related. Can any of the panelists speak to the CAFO expansion trends in different regions? Are they expanding into new regions or augmenting existing markets? How can we anticipate where they will pop up next?
And that might be best for maybe Emily. You want to just start with that, given that you all have perspective.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the answer is yes to both of those things. I think the industry is both consolidating in particular regions. And I can pop it in the chat, but EPA posts their running count of how many CAFOs are in each state, which they themselves admit is not like a full accounting of it. They don't have the full understanding of CAFOs nationwide, but there are a couple states where there is a huge CAFO presence. For instance, Iowa has over 4,000 CAFOs, primarily hog operations. North Carolina is a really big state for hog and poultry operations. California is huge for dairy. So yeah, there are definitely certain regions where we know there is a lot of consolidation of the industry. And you can look back at EPA's kind of historical accounting and see how those trends have changed. And states that are receiving kind of new influxes of those facilities.
And Craig, you might just describe a little bit about the sort of changing landscape, particularly in poultry, around plants closing and new plants opening, plants closing.
Yeah, it's like this multi-billion-dollar shell game, right? Tyson, the way vertical integration works is there's always built-in excess capacity, meaning the integrators always have more poultry houses. Speaking about poultry specifically, always have more chicken houses than they need for two reasons. One, they can make an example out of a farmer very quickly. It's not a blip on the radar. Number two, if they get an unexpected contract, all of a sudden they can fill that, right? So Tyson built the first new processing plant they built in 20 years, probably, in Humboldt, Tennessee. And it's huge. It's like a $400 million deal. And so that gave them like way more excess capacity than they needed. So these smaller, maybe less efficient plants, they're just shutting them down one by one because they have that excess capacity with that brand new shiny plant in Humboldt, Tennessee, and these brand new poultry houses in Humboldt, Tennessee, and surrounding counties to pick up the slack. So it's been and the farms, Jake, used to, it was like a regular farmer, and he would build 2 houses or maybe 4 houses, and when going about his business. Now it's a whole different thing. It's like the multiples are 8, 16, 24. We have some that are 48 house farms. And now each of these houses is 66 feet wide and 600 feet long. So you're talking about 48 houses. That's 40 acres of chickens in one pop. So that's changed. The number of farms, and we're pulling together some data right now. And it tells a story. It shows a lot of like decline in the number of farms, but the increase in the inventory. So the farms are getting fewer, but they're getting bigger, just like the integrators are getting fewer and getting bigger. So the consolidation is even happening at the farm level also.
Yeah, great. What's next, Mark?
Great. We have some comment in here from Dana and a question. Big thanks to Craig. It seems like most of us advocates on the animal welfare issue, the industry narrative has been very effective in smearing people who care about animals' treatment as silly, snowflakey whacktivists to be ignored. Any tips for talking specifically about humane treatment?
Is that for me?
I think it was you, Craig. Go ahead.
Oh my! I mean, as far as you can have industrial animal production, or you can have good animal welfare. You can't have both. That system is designed for those birds to grow abnormally fast, as quick as they can, just barely stay alive long enough to get to market. This is not about quality of life. This is about homogenizing widgets. So anything that I mean, I don't see how. I always say you can't defend a position there's no defense for. I don't see how these integrators even mention the word animal welfare and then their industrial system in the same breath, and actually people to take it seriously, right? There's we talk all the time about fighting industry narratives, and they're they've done a good job at this kind of Svengali kind of labeling system where they portray things as they certainly are not. So I just think you can Google a lot of go to like the ASPCA's got a good site, the shop with the heart. There'd be some good stuff to contradict industry narrative with that, certainly, and just look at the farms that are doing it right. and pull from that. And certainly it won't be anything relative to what the industry is doing. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of helpful things there, Craig. The other thing I think I would only add to that, what Craig said, is that it's an important point that we don't have to stray away from the cruelty of the system overall. That saying that we want higher welfare systems for animals doesn't necessarily mean that you mean, the most extreme sort of agenda perspective. And that I actually was just involved in some significant national polling that tells us that about 65% of Americans are actually in agreement with us on that. So while the industry certainly tries to paint that as a narrative that is not the sort of the truth of the matter is that in that same polling that I'm talking about, something like 68% of people who are involved in agriculture think that those are inhumane practices. So just so you know that, I think don't shy away from the idea are pretty extreme operations. What's next, Mark?
Great. There's a question in here, maybe something for Emily here. Is there a way to find out if a farmer is under a contract to a big corporation?
That might be a better question for Craig. I would think that would be pretty hard to uncover. It's not like something that you could submit a federal records request for. Yeah, I'm kind of coming up empty with that question.
I'm curious. Are you talking about, like, can you get on the internet and search and see if a farmer's under a contract? I'm not sure I follow the question 100%, but she's right. It's absolutely in North Carolina, it's weird. Poultry, the dry litter CAFO system, they're not required to have any sort of operating permits, and until here recently, they didn't even have to have a construction stormwater permit. So the DEQ has no idea what all these facilities are. Now the swine's a little different, and the layers are a little different. They have a wet litter system, so they do have permits. So you could painstakingly probably do it one at a time, but I don't think there's no quick answer there by any means.
Yeah, and I wonder, I'm not sure whether those permits would require the farmer to disclose any like affiliation with a corporate integrator.
You could do it really painstakingly. You could drive all over the country, and if there's a lane sign at the end of that farm that says this farmer is a Purdue farmer, then you would know that. But other than that, I really don't know.
Yeah, I think those are all the right answer. It's very difficult to know exactly what their private relationship is.
Great. Maybe time for one more here as we get into this. And someone, Jeff on here just mentioned, could you please comment on sort of the methodical or political erosion of local control?
Jake, you might be with this one.
Hey, that's a deep.
It goes back to the right to farm laws, and yeah.
I was going to say that's a deep question. So I think that particularly the political of local control really originates with, to Craig's point, a series of laws that started in the early 2000s, sort of mid 2000s, what most people call right to farm laws. Many of those laws were drafted by the industry think tanks, and then really made their way through sort of farm state legislatures in a lot of places. There's some versions oftentimes of right to farm laws that go back to the 70s, were updated or modified to sort of strip the sort of local control that a lot of states had within their constitutions related to agriculture issues. Those issues were actually also placed on the ballot in some states. So in my home state of Missouri here, in 2014, we had a right to farm law that passed barely through an initiative where I was active in the No campaign. And then in 2016, I was involved in work that defeated right to farm legislation in the state of Oklahoma. And the ballot work tended after that, but obviously industry was very active at pursuing that erosion through state legislators and other places. And so we also have this, and Emily can speak more to this question, but we also have this issue of like what is federal preemption. So right now there's an effort, for example, to preempt California's law that was passed around animal welfare, Proposition 12, at the federal level through the Farm Bill, but that preemption exists on the federal level frequently for lots of laws, sort of better potentially at the local level. So I don't know if there's anything, Emily, you would add there on the preemption issue, but.
Not on that specifically, but something that came to mind as you were talking was also that there are plenty of state legislatures that are passing laws saying that the state regulators can't impose stricter environmental standards than the federal government does. So another mechanism, I guess, to hamstring attempts to, at oversight of the industry, and another reason why improvements and reform at the federal level are really important and will have a trickle-down effect in a lot of different states.
And Jake, the right to farm laws weren't such a bad idea in concept. I mean, it's to protect the farmer against urban sprawl, but now the industry has used it as cover to, get immune themselves from any accountability when they go plop down in the middle of an. It should be the who was there first law, right?
Yeah, right. We often have right to farm laws being used. It's okay to move an industrial operation into right next door to a century farm that had been there for hundreds of, for 100+ years. And exactly right, to sort of distort that concept. But right to farm is a catchy phrase. And easy to put legislation.
And just shout out to Starla and the Oregon campaign for, in this like atmosphere of loss of local control, winning local control back in terms of their ability to impose setbacks at the county level. So great job.
Yeah, and Starla, I just invite you to say a couple words about we talked about the political, but just the connection that people have in your community to the idea of local control, the popularity of local control in your community.
Well, we're a bunch of independent-minded people. We wear a lot of flannel shirts and jeans, and nobody tells us what to do. So that part is good, but we also are ignorant of the workings of the government. And that's why all the help we got was so vital. Like, I didn't even know what the House and the Senate meant or how to pass a bill, but definitely standing up for our neighborhoods and our communities 100%. Man, we were doing it. And we also had little reward systems. Some of these loggers and farmers get together every Friday. They'd invite me in and encourage me. And every time we won anything, we'd have a celebration because we had to keep pumping ourselves up for the fight. So, yeah.
Great. Mark, do we have time for one more, or should we be wrapping up? Might have lost Mark.
I think we have time for one more.
Great. Well, maybe I'll just ask as we're kind of preparing to close out here, guys, is we've been talking a lot about the opportunity for folks to work within their communities, work at the state level, work at the federal level in collaboration. I wonder if you all could give us just one example of something that your collaboration, a coalition, something on the horizon that each of you are sort of excited about or hopeful for in the next coming little bit, whether it's next 6 months or a year or a couple of years, things that you think will be sort of powerful collaborative opportunities going forward. Maybe we'll start with let's start with Starla on that.
I'm not quite sure I understood your whole question, but you're talking about collaborative opportunities. Is
What are you excited about? What collaborative opportunities are you excited? Now that collaborative opportunities are you excited? Now that you guys have won some victories, what are you excited about next?
going down to the creek and it's still clean, number one. And I watch being here for these 2 days, I would be really excited if there could be one central page where we could collaborate with all of y'all and have times where we could speak and share our ideas and our experiences. We've got some long-term researching people and people who have really great ideas that need to be tapped into everybody. And I'm speaking nationally. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, great. Yeah, great. Thank you. Maybe you want to share what you're excited about.
Who's that?
Let's have Emily go next, and I'll let you go last, Craig.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm excited to continue working with the kind of clean water coalition we've formed around the federal work, and also in the Packers and Stockyard Act context, because I think those are very much still live. But I think in addition to that, one area that already has a really robust coalition working on it, but will kind of need continued action is around factory farm gas. This effort to monetize the factory farm waste stream and create this renewable natural gas from CAFO manure and sell it off for money. So just further entrenching the kind of dirty system with monetary incentives. So yeah, Food and Water Watch does a lot of work on that front, and I know SRAP does as well, and others. So excited to continue working in that space too.
Great. And Craig, what are you excited about for the future?
Oh my gosh, the momentum we've gained, I would say, over the last 10 years. I picture this snowball going downhill. When it goes downhill, it keeps picking up and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. That's what I think our momentum is doing, is we're getting more folks to collaborate with us on these issues and to hold this industry accountable, number one, and move the needle to a better food system, number two. I mean, there's just nothing but upside from here on out.
Yeah, great. I think that's right. And I think I'll just wrap up with the fact that what I have, as someone who's been working in this space for, a couple of decades now, not to date myself, but to say that, I think moving forward is things like this, that the sort of general recognition that we all need to be working together more collaboratively. And that, if you look back over the list of involved in, engaged in this summit, if you look at the list of folks as I was browsing earlier, who many names pop up who I'm familiar with on the folks listening in and attending is that we need to be, we've needed for years to be sort of aggregating power of the people to really combat this significant industry that we're up against. And in a lot of ways, we're maybe the most organized we have ever been, in my opinion, and that this is paying dividends. It's paid dividends in Oregon, where Starla's community was, its water is still clean. It's paid dividends with the Packers and Stockyards work that so many of us have been involved in. It needs to continue to pay dividends in the EPA process that's been outlined that Emily was chatting about. It's paid dividends in political terms with our political candidates. And we just need to continue as a movement to aggregate our power and to make sure we're balls between our individual interests, whether we come from animal welfare backgrounds or environmental backgrounds or farming backgrounds or health backgrounds. Those walls that sort of have divided us have sort of advantaged the industry historically. And we're all doing a much better job recently in making sure that we're working together and collaborating. So I was excited to moderate this great panel, and I want to just thank the panelists again for all your work and all your expertise in this space. And I want to thank SRAP for being such a great collaborator. Go through this time where we are making progress, but there's still a lot of fight ahead of us. So I'm eager and excited to see what all of you do and what we can all do together over the next couple. That is going to be an important piece of SRAP's work, and I'm just glad to be in the fight with you all. So thanks so much for this session, and I know we're getting close to the end, but I hope you all will stick around for our keynote, because I know Austin's going to do a wonderful job, and I'm excited to hear his conversation, and you all should go read his book when you can.
Thank you so much, Jake. We're going to pass it over to Sherry now, who's going to introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jake, and thank you all of the panelists. Thanks for everybody for sticking around with us this afternoon. These have been incredible conversations over the last 2 days. We have seen how organizing can work to stop these operations from coming in. We've seen how vigilance and watchdogging can work to hold these corporations accountable. We've seen how reformed policy can quickly change the game. We've heard about how data tells the real story about these operations and the harms that they bring to communities. We've seen the power of building trust and relationships, sometimes with the unlikeliest of allies. We've seen the power of stories and lived experiences and voices, individual voices, and how that can really make a difference when we're advocating for something better for our future. We've seen the power of people coming together, as Jake just mentioned, building movement power, amplifying messages, and challenging the industry narratives by shining a light on the realities of this system. With that in mind, I think there's no better person that I can think of to close out this summit. Austin Frerick is a friend. He is a board member for SRAP. We're super happy and blessed to be able to have him on our board. He is also the author of Barons, Money, Power, and the Corruption of America's Food Industry. Austin is an expert on agricultural and antitrust policy. During the 2020 presidential campaign, he advised candidates Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Pete Buttigieg. I just said that wrong. Buttigieg on agricultural policy before ultimately serving as co-chair of the Biden campaign's Agriculture Antitrust Policy Committee. He is a fellow of the Thurman Arnold Project at Yale University, an initiative that brings together faculty, students, and scholars to collaborate on research related to competition policy and antitrust enforcement. He also serves on the board of directors for Common Good Iowa and Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. Austin is a 7th-generation Iowan. His mother, Kathy, managed a beauty salon in his hometown of Cedar Rapids before opening her own bakery. His father, Scott, delivered and merchandised beer for a local family-owned beer distributor. Austin's passion for agriculture comes from spending weekends working with his grandpa Frerick. So Austin, I will let you take it from here.
Thanks for the introduction, Sherry. And it's totally because of my dad that I love grocery stores. So you should feel sorry for my husband, because when we travel anywhere in America, I love going to grocery stores and just seeing what's new and how companies merchandise. But yeah, so this is my book, just published about a month ago, Barons, as Sherry said. What I do is I talk about 7 different robber barons in the food system. And it's not just the lifestyles of the rich and famous book. That said, there are some juicy details. But I use these robber barons as a way to tell bigger structural stories. So, like, for example, Cargill is my grain baron. And unbeknownst to me until I started this project, Cargill's the largest private company in America. They're bigger than the Koch brothers. So I use their story to talk about the Farm Bill and how I argue that basically the Farm Bill is now designed for Wall Street at the expense of all of us. It's all about overproducing grains at the expense of everything else. So that's what I kind of do throughout the book. I have a coffee baron. I have Driscoll's as my berry baron. Walmart's my grocery baron. So yeah, that's kind of how I look at things. But what I really want to focus today's talk on is what do we do from here? Where do we go? Because I think, especially in this moment right now, given how dark the world is, people are craving a positive vision. And I think articulating that positive vision helps inspires people to overcome these robber barons. Because part of the reason why I wanted to use this robber baron framework is to show people we've been here before, we know what to do. And it's so cartoonish too. Like the fact that my dairy baron is Mike and Sue Mikulski. They created that brand Fairlife Milk. You might have seen it in the store. Well, it turns out they claimed residency at the Puerto Rico Ritz-Carlton. And there's something morally wrong that it's someone who identifies as a dairy farmer lives at the Ritz-Carlton in Puerto Rico. So first thing first, and I know this was talked about in the last panel, but I can't say this enough, is not only the watchdog component to this kind of work, but building relationships with journalists, I think, is so crucial. You're never going to be dollar for dollar with a robber baron, but lean into that David versus Goliath narrative. A lot of journalists are barely getting by right now. They're asked to do a lot. They're not paid that much. The easier you make their life, the better. And then that comes in a few different ways. First, let them know about your victories. So when you beat a confinement person, or when you take something down, or you find something, brag about it. Reach out to journalists. Hey, just so you know, this happened. We did this. Keep in mind when you email journalists, always be respectful, be nice, but let them know, because assume that they just don't know, because so much is happening and they only have so much time. On the other side, let them know if you see something sketchy. If you're driving down the road and you're seeing a confinement doing something they shouldn't do, or it's illegal, or if they're putting manure on snow, give them a ring, give them a heads up. I've done that a lot personally. I mean, I'm pretty open at this point, where I'm personally repulsed by Secretary Vilsack. I think he really captures an awful mix of corruption and incompetency of this moment. And so I enjoy leaking stories on Vilsack to media, because it's, people like Vilsack will never do the right thing at the end of the day. You got to never forget the power of shame. Is a lot of these people that do corrupt behavior don't want their dirty secrets exposed. And then once you shine the light on it, that's a lot of power. And so flag it for journalists. Or if you see certain people being quoted in news outlets, for example, in Iowa, there's an academic at Iowa State. I talk about this in my book, Dermot Hayes. He's like the hog industry's go-to academic. So, for example, they're trying to speed up the kill lines in hog slaughterhouses, and he'll always say, "Oh, this is great. This is great for industry. This is good for Iowa farmers," which is just BS. I mean, we know this is a very dangerous job, and he's just trying to make it more dangerous. But what he doesn't disclose to journalists is he actually does business dealings with my hog baron. He is on the board for some of these companies. He's expert witness for some of these companies. So he's not disclosing to people that he has vested interest in the robber barons. So I mean, I send emails to these journalists just to let them know. Things like that really do matter to journalists. They don't get quoted then. So that's kind of one of my first things is lean into this David versus Goliath moment. Have fun with it. I mean, it's kind of exciting when something you tell journalists gets published, So that's one thing you can do. And to me now, stepping back, bigger picture is, thank you, Dana. Actually, let me just tell you one little example. Two things to make this really concrete. One is, you guys know that movie, the movie Fargo, there's that famous mulch scene. Well, a confinement person was doing that in Western Iowa with his dead pig bodies. And I mean, that's illegal. And he was just putting on his farm fields. Well, an older woman I know was driving by, saw it, called the DNR in Iowa. DNR didn't do anything. So you know what she did? She called the Omaha TV stations. And that blew up on local TV news. And then that confinement owner got fined. The other example is right now the big thing in the Midwest are these carbon pipelines. Industry is arguing that they want to capture ethanol gas, transport it across up to the Dakotas and use it for fracking and call it good for the climate. Well, Secretary Vilsack's son was at the most elite law firm in Iowa, left that job and to make a lot more money working for one of these ethanol barons building these pipelines. keep in mind, this model is only economically viable if daddy delivers. That type of corruption is just why so many people don't believe in the system anymore. A friend of mine, Flake, told me about that. There's actually his son updated his LinkedIn. A friend told me about that in Des Moines, Iowa, and I flagged it for journalists, and then Tom at Mother Jones reported it. Now people know. It was just a simple email. I let Tom, hey, just so you know, take this. He went down and explored it. Turns out there was a lot more going on there. So that is huge, because it's once you start shining light into this stuff, that's when the corruption comes light. And the beauty of this moment of the internet is a good news story URL never dies, so it's always out there. But anyways, talking about moving forward, so I talked about what you can do at the individual level, but the bigger picture is I see two big things. One, the silver lining of this moment, and I think it's been underappreciated, is the coming death of ethanol. Cars are moving to hybrids and EVs, electric vehicles. And they're moving pretty fast. I mean, there's all these stories now of China is producing electric vehicles cheaper than a normal car. But most people don't realize now it's the largest use of corn in America is ethanol. So that transition is going to happen fast. So we need to start thinking about now, what are we going to do with all that land currently in ethanol production? We see what the Vilsack types are trying to do. They're trying to put in the airplanes. I like to call people that think that ethanol is good for the climate flat earthers at this point, because we know it's just not. There's a reason why the Museum of Failure included ethanol in it. So to me, my big hope here is we use this as a moment to phase out CAFOs, confinements, put animals back on the land, which that's my favorite soundbite to use right now, because I'm pro-family farmer. Like I want to really, it's fun rhetoric to play with Farm Bureau, because you want the industry to essentially, why is the industry against family farms? Don't you want more farms? We all know it makes a better tasting food, better for rural communities, better for the environment, what have you. That to me is like the positive vision. Is I don't think either party right now has a positive vision for rural communities or the food system. And so really articulating this is what we should do as ethanol dies is one of my big projects, or like one of my big hopes, because there is going to be a moment where, you know, that moment is coming, and it's coming sooner than most people expect. And then the other big thing, and what I'm working on right now, is I really do think we should sunset the Farm Bill as it currently is. I'm not talking the food assistance programs. I'm just talking crop insurance, commodity programs, and conservation program. The fact that you get conservation dollars now for a hog confinement manure lagoon just tells you how broken it all is. To me, the best example of how wild it's, or how corrupted it's gotten, is crop insurance. Like, I view the Farm Bill now as a massive corporate giveaway where there's no caps on crop insurance. And unbeknownst to most people, when you hear the term crop insurance, you think, oh, bad weather, but it's really just insurance for against low prices. But keep in mind, Bill Gates is one of the largest owner of farmland now in America. So if he wants to grow corn and soy, he can get as much crop insurance as he wants. Keep in mind what this does too is it really pushes farmers to engage in grain and soy production at the expense of everything else. It kind of crowds out stuff. And I think it's been underappreciated how much ethanol has been destructive to the Midwest, and that it's pushed a lot of family farms off their pasture. How can you compete in rental prices, you know, against these industrial Bill Gates type operations doing corn and soy when you're just doing like a herd of, you know, cattle on pasture? So that to me is a big thing. Is just take that money that's in the Farm Bill and put it into one big conservation program. You know, reward different types of things, but right now the Farm Bill picks favorites, winners and losers, and I would argue why it takes money now to be healthy in America. It's this obesity crisis. America is really rooted in the Farm Bill, where heavily processed food is cheap compared to fresh produce. And I know industry, the Farm Bureau types will love to say, "Oh, well, this system makes food cheap, cheap, cheap." That's just not factually true. That to me is like that. What really blew my mind, because I kind of assumed they were right. When you actually look at it, dollar for dollar per person, Americans spend more money on food, on groceries, than most Western democracies. We're actually about dollar for dollar equal with Italy. And trust me, when you go to these countries, what a dollar food gets you is way better. than what you can get for like $1 at Dollar General in Iowa. But we should be surprised by that. I mean, these food markets in America are incredibly concentrated. And that, I mean, that is what monopolies do, is when they're concentrated, they gouge. I mean, I argue that if there's one graphic I could include in my book, it would be the beef markets right now. The price for beef in the store keeps going up and up, but what that rancher gets is flat. And that is just classic textbook monopoly. So I love kind of pushing back on the industry on that, because it's just, I mean, that to me is the biggest thing I've seen in the last few months. It's just grocery store prices. I mean, I saw a bag of Lay's chips the other day for $6, which you just have to laugh at, because it's just a fried potato. But so that's kind of what I wanted to focus on, is where do we go from here? I view my book as, let's have an honest conversation over, this is where things are. One man does 5 million hogs in Iowa, but what do we do from here? What could the system be? It's a little corny. Some of you have heard me say this, but I really do think Iowa should be the Italy of North America. These rural communities have the best soil, beautiful brick towns. Let's lean into that. These communities were healthy when their money stayed in these communities. Because right now, rural America is producing the most it's ever produced, but none of that wealth is staying there. It's being extracted out. It's like my hog baron lives in Naples, Florida. My dairy baron has a home at the Ritz-Carlton. You know what I mean? Like this thing is, it's just wrong. Whereas family farmers who live in these communities, they pay taxes in these communities. They keep their money in these communities. And it's such a win-win, because I should also say, I don't want to romanticize the past. I know some people do that. I think there's really important lessons to learn. But moving forward is, how do we incorporate things from the past, but also embrace technology? Like, there's going to be more robotics in food and agriculture. That's fine. That's cool. I mean, you go to a modern combine today, these things are almost driving themselves. But what I promise you is, robots can't do animals on pasture. I mean, sure, you might have a robotic milker, but one person can only look after so many cows. So that's kind of what I want to focus on. And I also just think it'll help take the temperature down in America. Who isn't happy after a good meal? One of my silver linings of writing this book was I did a lot of taste testings. So I would do like little milk samplings of industrial confinement milk, pasture milk, my dairy baron's milk. And inputs matter. When a cow eats a diverse array of grasses, it's going to make such a better product than the cow that's in the metal shed all day. And people notice that. So that's kind of my concluding remarks. I'm happy to take questions. If anyone has any questions or wants to follow up later too, my email is austin.ferrick@yale.edu. My socials are Austin Ferrick too.
Are there any questions for Austin before he gets up here? You can raise your hand, or you can put them in the chat or the Q&A. Anything here that you'd like to ask Austin? We have him for a few more minutes here.
Well, you guys think, 2 quick notes. So as you read the book, let me know if there's any good little juicy tidbits I missed. I always love hearing those stories. That's been one of the fun things of my book talk, is people come up afterwards being like, oh, you should really look here. I will note, to my knowledge, there's only one error in the book so far. So I have 1,000 footnotes, because if you're going to write a book like this, you got to cross your T's, dot your I's. But I opened my book telling the story of Julie Dunn, this woman in Iowa fighting back against hog confinements. And I say that she lives in Eldora, Iowa, but I accidentally wrote El Dorado. So I just want to let you guys know that. And then also, anyone that knows anything about Cisco or Cal Maine, let me know. I'm kind of toying around them as my next barons. But yeah, Sherry, do you have a question?
I do. Actually, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a regenerative farmer here in Indiana, and he read your book, and he said he wished you would have included more solutions. So I'm curious what your ideas are for solutions and whether or not that's going to be your next book.
So to be honest, when I first started writing this first draft of this book, I didn't do too much solutions, but what I realized is I gave a keynote in Marble Seed a year ago, and just reading the room is people want solutions. Mm-hmm. So I did some of the conclusion, and I'm actually working on an article now fleshing out another idea more. So besides the whole farm bill, kind of junking or sunsetting the modern farm bill, thinking about life post-ethanol, putting animals on the land, my other big thing, or 2 more things I should say, is one, is using procurement power. Schools buy a lot of stuff, colleges buy a lot of stuff. How do we reward and stabilize people doing it right through those purchasing decisions? It's also just good politics. Who doesn't want all milk served in Indiana coming from Indiana dairy farmers doing it pasture versus like, you know, New Mexico industrial dairy? And that's something you can do locally. And then the other thing is, I'm a big believer in personnel as policy. USA has a lot of political appointees, and who's in the room really does matter. So, you know, with another election on the horizon in America, I encourage groups to start thinking about who do you want in these positions of power. You know, it's, you know, when you're dealing with Vilsack types, you know, it's a lot different than if you have someone like, you know, if Mike Calcrate was, you know, if Mike Calcrate was running GIPSA, just imagine what GIPSA would be doing. And so, but you guys start thinking those lists now. I encourage groups to think about, you know, what seats do we want? Who's interested in serving in public service? What positions are important? All that kind of stuff. So that's the big thing, is because it's these conversations go a lot better with who's sitting at the table.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Looks like we do have a question in the Q&A here from Dana. There are quite a lot of good policies coming out of the current administration, but why is this admin is failing on transformative ag policy?
I think in agriculture or in food, you see both the best and worst of this administration. The best is, I think, the appointment of Commissioner Lena Khan to the FTC it's just been universally praised. I mean, I just reading today in the Wall Street Journal that Matt Gaetz is applauding her for her work on big tech, her work against these non-competes. I mean, this young woman is filing all these anti-monopoly cases against big tech. She's challenging the Kroger-Albertson merger. And not only that, I mean, she's a hero. I mean, she walks into these law schools in America and she fills a room. The kids just adore her. And like, she was just in Iowa last week to an audience of 100, you know, hearing more about the pending Coke fertilizer merger. So that's huge. But on the flip side, I think it's Vilsack. I think Vilsack is I think a strong case could be argued that he is Biden's worst political appointment. I mean, this is what happens when you appoint an industrial dairy lobbyist as Secretary of Agriculture. You get someone behaving like they want to be a lobbyist again. I mean, I compare this the other day. I like to think of Secretary Vilsack like, if you remember the movie or musical Music Man, he's like Harold Hill. He'll tell you what you want to hear, but he doesn't mean a goddamn word he says. The fact is, the American meat markets have gotten more concentrated under this administration, which is just incredible to see, because I've seen I haven't seen a more bipartisan pinata saying hit me than tackle these meat monopolies these last few years. We saw what these companies did to workers during COVID. They're gouging farmers right now. Consumers have seen it at the store. And on top of it, they're not even American companies. I mean, JBS is my slaughtering bear in my book. They're the largest meat packer the world's ever seen. They became a monopolist through bribery. And like, these aren't even allegations. They pled guilty to bribing over 1,800 Brazilian politicians to become a monopoly. And what did Vilsack do? He made them pay a fine. And then I agree with Craig. They are felons. They are the closest thing we have in America to a modern day criminal organization operating as a corporation. That, to me, when I read that slaughtering baron chapter, I'm not even mad at them. I'm mad at Vilsack, because to me, they're just like a kid or a bully that was never said no to, and they keep pushing the envelope. And so people like Vilsack, yeah, they're throwing all these money at startups, but you are not going to get an ounce of market share against an organization as ruthless as JBS. Vilsack wants to pretend to care, but he doesn't want to really care. And to me, the scary thing here is not only have all these major meat companies bought more companies, Walmart is making these aggressive plays in the beef industry and dairy, because from everything I've heard, Walmart is PO'd at these slaughterhouses, and it knows USDA is incompetent. So it's making it so it's taking action to its own hands. So that is like, we shouldn't depend on Walmart to save us, but that's where we are right now. And so that to me is why we are where we are, is in the food space, where there hasn't been progress, is honestly, truly the appointment of Secretary Vilsack. And I think people need to know what people like him do is they'll tell you what you want to hear, but they also do this thing where they'll give a little money to people, or they'll bring you into the office, they'll pretend if you're heard. Just know that they're playing you. In the day, what are you doing to improve people's lives? I mean, I lost it the other day when I found out they slow walk these GIPSA rules that are coming out, which I'm sorry, you worked on them for 8 years in the previous administration. Why could you not copy and paste them? And then when they announce them, they include chicken, but not turkey. And then on top of it, the fact that one of his staffers blamed turkey farmers for not speaking up. Why? That is like so bothersome, because it's like people spoke up. There was those famous 2009 hearings. They don't trust you. At this point, the burden's on USDA to do something. The other thing to Sherry's question earlier about what to do on the solutions part, I'm really at the point now of stripping USDA for parts. By every metric, it's failed. It's failed farmers. What a farmer gets at the store is the lowest recorded in American history. It's failing eaters. It's failing our workers. The only thing it's succeeding at is helping Wall Street. So I think we should start taking away some of its power. Like, take away its meat antitrust authority. Give it to the Federal Trade Commission. It's proven it's incompetent at that job. Maybe take away SNAP. Give it to HHS. Trust me, nothing scares a DC organization more than threatening to cut their budget. But I just think that's kind of where I'm at with USDA. There's a degree of incompetency I do not have time for anymore. Sorry, that's like a rant, but
that's great. Wonderful. I think we're getting really close to time. Is there any final questions or thoughts here before we go? I think we're getting really close to being respectful of people's time and contribution to this, but I think we all appreciate you, Austin. So,
oh no, I mean, this call is full of people that, I mean, this book is, I was able to write a book like this because there's people on this call. I mean, I kind of view a lot of academics guys kind of useless in this space. You know, there's so much corporate money sloshing around these land grants, but it's journalists and longtime farmers, longtime people in this space that, you know, they know where everything's at. They'll tell you where all the bodies are buried. And so, I mean, I'm so indebted in this book to that. I mean, you can kind of, if you read between the lines, you can kind of see our calf's influence on my slaughtering chapter, milkweed's influence on my dairy chapter, all that kind of good stuff. So thank you guys. Keep up the good work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Austin. Sherry, do you want to take us out here as we finalize things here?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for to everyone here, the participants, the organizational allies, to our speakers, to the SRAP staff, who I'm forever indebted to you, Mark, for helping facilitate this entire program. I walk away from these events feeling inspired, slightly exhausted, but super inspired. And I really do think, we're facing an incredible battle in this work, but I also believe that we have seen what we can do when we band together and we're talking about it, and we know what we need to do in order to work together and to stay vigilant and to keep on this path. So I think, just for everyone who's not with SRAP, please come to our website, get in touch with us. Let's figure out how we can continue to work together. It's sraproject.org. Get on our newsletter list, donate if you can. We need all the support we can get in order to do this important work, but just stay with us and figure out a way that we can build movement power and really look at policy and look at organizing our communities and think about what we can do on a state level, et cetera. There's just so much work to be done, and we need everyone at the table. These stories, these lived experiences, these voices, we need all of this to bring to the table. I'm super jazzed about the conversation around data and what we can do with that as we move forward. So, we're stronger together. So I just want to kind of leave it with that. Thank you all so much for joining us these past 2 days. And find a way, please, to stay in touch with us, and let's look at what we can do as we move forward. So thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.